Yo, how's it going? We're gonna get started in just a minute. Just wanna double check on some of the audio stuff. So, testing 1, 2, 3, testing 1, 2, you're back. Okay. It sounds good, I guess. As good as it's gonna get, for the most part. Getting started really late. Which is alright. Damn. Okay. Shit. Okay. I think that's good. There.
Freeze this frame and watch the eyelids. That shouldn't be easy to fake in 2011.
I watch a little
14
bit
years
of
later, there's
YouTube.
still no set photo, no maker, and no clean original tapes. This is
maybe
one of the most
chat if
unusual
anybody
videos
comes through,
I've ever seen.
and
today we're gonna separate the footage
down to play some
from the packaging and let the
Overwatch.
details speak for themselves. Quick rewind to 2011.
Haven't
The UK
played it
drops
all
35
today.
Ministry of Defense UFO files. 8,500 pages.
I gotta
were sent out
stop
to the
doing
public,
that. I
including
gotta
tips from pilots, people who claim
Play
they've been
more.
abducted, mass sightings. Then the FBI
Even my
launches the
therapist
Vault
is telling
in the
me to fucking
1950
play more,
Huddle
which
memo
is
gets
crazy. I've
released, sparking
never
an insane amount of interest
had that
among UFO
happen.
researchers. And in March of 2011, the Pentagon admitted to having 24,000 highly classified and sensitive files stolen from them. And in the middle of this crazy storm, a new channel emerges on YouTube and uploads 4 of the most mysterious, eerie, and jaw-dropping videos of what seems to be real aliens and real UFOs. So today, I break down all the clips. The close-up with the stadiometer where they measure out this being, the color walk with human escorts, the crash site, the autopsy, the flying saucers just hovering in the sky. If this was a hoax, it was at the highest level. And if this is real, it was definitely curated. Either way, it is the most convincing alien footage on YouTube, and it has yet to be fully debunked. Like this video, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I'll see you guys in the bunker.
In about 2002, when my daughter was around 10 years old, we were driving north on 80 towards Travis Air Force Base, and we noticed 3 big rigs driving in the slow lane that were oversized, silver, very, very clean looking, and didn't have license plates. So we were very curious about this, so we drove closer and pulled up alongside of them, and my daughter, being the brave little girl that she was, stared at them pretty hard, and I would glance over as well, and all 3 drivers looked alike. They all had very white, pale skin, slicked back black hair, wore dark sunglasses, and white button-up shirts with a black tie. And no matter how much my daughter gawked at them, they wouldn't move. They wouldn't acknowledge her.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the bunker. This video is going to be a little different this week, and I'm going to try and spice things up, just to, shuffle it up a bit, keep you guessing. Normally we look through these Freedom of Information Act documents or chapters from old books that I've had, or old cases, in fact, or even transcripts from videos. But today we're going to be looking at a video, well, multiple videos, featuring the most famous alien on the internet, according to me. This unresolved case has been haunting me and plaguing me for years. There's a massive debate online. Some people think it's clearly fake due to some of the things that they've added in posts. And some people, especially the people that have looked further into this, have said, well, let's not jump the gun. So originally these videos were posted by a user to YouTube by the name of Ivan0135. He's only posted 4 videos. Those are the only videos that live on the channel. He's added descriptions to some of these videos, and he's even responded to an email, allegedly, which we'll get into a little bit later, that sheds a little bit more light and adds context to some of these postings. This was posted in April, I think April 13th, the first one in 2011. 2011 was a bit of a remarkable year for UFOs in general. You see, the Ministry of Defense in the UK released 35 files on UFO encounters. Over 24,000 secret files, top secret files from the Pentagon were stolen. Makes you wonder, was Skinny Bob a part of that leak? The FBI launches the Vault archives, where you can go and through the Freedom of Information Act and through all the other released files, you can go search some declassified stuff on the FBI's website and just check out their archive. The most famous and the most clicked on piece of document on the entire website surface, which was the Hoddle memo, which is this here. And the Hoddle memo is basically about a guy Hoddle, that wrote to the director of the FBI saying that an investigator for the Air Force stated that 3 so-called flying saucers had been recovered in New Mexico. They were described as being circular in shape with raised centers, approximately 50 feet in diameter. Each one was occupied by 3 bodies. First of all, 50 feet in diameter, 3 bodies. Who does that sound like? This sounds like the sports model. Each one was occupied by 3 bodies of human shape, but only 3 foot tall, dressed in metallic cloth of a very fine texture. Each body was bandaged in a manner similar to the blackout suits used by speed flyers and test pilots. They also said that the saucers that were found in New Mexico were dropped due to very high-powered radar setup in that area, and it's believed the radar interferes with the controlling mechanism of the saucer. So that went absolutely haywire when that came out. That was April 2011. Quite timely indeed. So either Ivan had this video in his back pocket and was like, this is a perfect time to release, the craziest alien video ever, or this was from March of the same year, and he doctored the video a little bit to mask it using the audio or the scratch marks or the fake KGB symbol. maybe that's what happened. And why would he do that? Well, we'll get into that a little bit later. There's several reasons why you might want to do that, including 2011 was a different time period. It isn't like today. If you wanted clicks online or you wanted people to see your videos, you know, we're talking about the alien autopsy video, the famous one, the graphic one where they're, which again, still debated, is it real, is it not? I'm leaning towards not, but the virality of that video, is similar to this. So maybe he wanted to emulate that video a little bit more to, give it a little bit more legs. Well, that isn't it for 2011, because April 2011, in the exact same month,
some legs.
the Russian teenagers confessed to the alien in the snow video, this one here, being a hoax. They said it was made of chicken skin and bread, which I still don't see. I mean, you get an A+ in your home ec class if you're making chicken skin bread aliens look this good. And not to mention, in pop culture, we had alien-themed movies. We had Battle of Los Angeles in March, Paul in March, Super 8 in June, and The Darkest Hour in December. So quite an eventful year 2011 was for the UFO community. I mean, it sounds like the heyday. It sounds like, the golden age. Okay, so we're going to break down the videos one at a time in order. I will let you watch the entirety of the video, after which we'll go through a little bit of a breakdown, consulting skinnybob.info, as that's probably the best place to get all the information out of it. The first video here was released in April, and it shows footage of a saucer-shaped UFO hovering above a building. It looks to be shot from the perspective of a moving car. Then the footage transitions to a closer look at the craft, as seen in the air from maybe a plane or a helicopter, and before depicting the scene of what appears to be a non-fatal UFO crash, with the UFO in the background, smoke billowing from the UFO, and then one being is seen standing in the footage before the camera pans to the downed craft, and another being laying on the floor. Let's have a look at this video. Incredibly disturbing. I don't know, maybe just me. It looks disturbing to me. I see something like that, and there's just part of me that's like creeped out thinking, this might be real. But before we get into the analysis of the videos, let's analyze something in sort of the metadata of the video. There is the description of the video that we're going to take a look at. So the description here is really interesting. It says leaked Air Force UFO footage. Okay, first of all, so Air Force, we're talking Project Blue Book back then, not 1942, I believe it was 1952, but the range works out as it says classified document 1942 to 1969. Relevant information, the video contains a sample edited fragment of tapes 01, 03, and 04. Tape duration is 180 minutes. 3 hours, folks, and we're getting 1.26 minutes. Okay, so these are fragments apparently from different tapes. Tape 1 has a title Tin Bird. Tape 3, Flying Twin. Tape 4 has Blue Boys and Blue Boys Meeting. Now, what do they mean by Blue Boys? Obviously, Flying Twin, assume this is some type of code language for the craft. Same with Tin Bird. But Blue Boys, I mean, that's interesting. Blue Boys, according to a lot of research, can mean one of two things. One, assuming a German origin, it could be translated to Blaue Jungs, which literally translates to Blue Boys in German, but that was the name or the term they used for the Marines that were in the German Navy during World War II. Blaue Jungs, Blue Boys. And the other more probable explanation would be this. So it might actually be a moniker that's referring to Project Blue Book staff. The report by Lauren E. Gross from 1971 cites a NICAP publication on page 5 containing the following paragraph. I duly noted the myriad explanations given out by the Blue Book staff, widely referred to as the Little Blue Boy Blues, or the Little Blue Boys, of sightings which they evaluated as mistakenly identified stars, planets, meteors, etc. So Project Blue Book was created in 1952, but the material in Ivan's possession was allegedly covering a span from 1942 to 1969. Now, Blue Book, again, had only been created in 52, so what are we talking about here? When's this footage from? Now, assuming they used the words Blue Boys in the context of Project Blue Book, that would put this somewhere after 1952, unless Ivan just randomly put that in there, not realizing the slight anachronism. So here is the website skinnybob.info, and it says a forensic analysis. Let's read the foreword here real quick. We present a detailed analysis of allegedly leaked UFO and alien footage. This time it's not about lights in the sky or anecdotal reports, but ambiguous imagery. Authentic evidence of extraterrestrial visitation would be among the most sensitive and closely guarded secrets kept by intelligence agencies around the world. Without an official disclosure process, the only way for the general public to tap into such knowledge is through whistleblowers and occasional leaks. We might be dealing with such a leak here. If your initial reaction is dominated by disbelief and ridicule, your brain is wired properly to live a healthy life in a complex world, but perhaps not to unveil something truly exceptional far out in the fringe. In hope and prospect of doing so, we dare to peek into this rabbit hole with an open mind. An expectation to witness initial absurdity becoming harsh reality. Be careful with quick and overly confident assessments based on cursory inspection of the material and preconceived notions about the topic. Both credulity and premature rejection could be misleading. Promoting the possibility of Skinny Bob being authentic is a bet against all odds and bears the danger of getting carried away by a fantasy. But since unlikely things happen every once in a while, what if the truth is actually right in front of you? Now, let's talk about Ivan for a second. The videos were uploaded to a YouTube channel named Ivan0135 in 2011. The channel was created the same day the first video was uploaded on April 13th. According to the channel description, the creator is from Russia and was born in 1969. We can't verify the channel creator and or uploader is in fact a single individual and really named Ivan. For the sake of simplicity, however, we continue to refer to the uploader as Ivan and address him as a single individual throughout this website. According to the information provided, the uploaded clips are small samples selectively taken from a larger collection of video material. The original footage is apparently spread across several physical tapes. Ivan provides detailed lists of tape numbers and timestamps for all the clips presented, even embeds an animated timestamp in the first two videos to indicate where the original footage, the sequence, was taken from. So Ivan put a bunch of keywords as well for the SEO, the search engine optimization. The keywords are, UFO, crash accident, alien, department, leak, abduction, New Mexico, yada, 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 yada. It does say, however, note the misspelling of Roswell and sloppiness with spaces, causing, for example, top and secret to become separate tags. That misspelling of declassified as desclassified could be due to the Spanish/Portuguese equivalent of desclasificado. This could hint to Ivan's native language. Very interesting stuff indeed. Or a purposeful red herring, who knows? So these are all the original videos. We've just checked one out. Now we're going to be talking about that first one. So the very first video Ivan uploaded starts with an image showing the insignia of the KGB, the main security agency of the Soviet Union. Above and below are black bars, seemingly censoring something, okay? It's so cool to know that there's like internet detectives out there. It's such an awesome thing because it turns out that the still image was actually taken from a documentary, The Secret KGB UFO Files, released in 1998. It featured a crashed UFO and an autopsy of an alien body. So the Secret KGB UFO Files video released in 1998 was successfully and sufficiently debunked, making it a commercial hoax. So Ivan used something that was on a hoaxed video and overlaid it on this. How strange. Just a quick reminder, guys, don't forget to check out our brand new Area 52 tees. These classic tees feature the Area 52 logo embroidered on the front and printed on the back. They are super comfy. Check them out, area52.shop. The dirt overlay. Okay, this part is really important for skeptics and believers alike. Ivan tampered with the original footage by applying various effects, such as damaged film overlay, like this. So Brooklyn Robot on Reddit managed to track down the exact film damage overlay Ivan used. The Shutterstock and the Pond 5, and now you look at it, it's exactly the same. Here are all the layers. This is so good. I mean, such a great deep dive here, possibly another film editor, but so many layers were applied. And here's the order. Oh my God. So the upload date of the oldest stock with artifacts, boom. The KGB and then multiple image ghosting, the black redaction shapes, the horizontal banding lines, and the slight rolling warp, the diagonal rainbow moire, and then the MPEG artifacts. That is so cool that they went and did this. I love the internet for that. So again, we look at the timestamps here. Those were put in post. So now we got to look at motivations. What would compel someone to do this? Number one, spicing up bland footage. Imagine getting a hold of highly sensitive, leaked UFO and alien footage from the 1940s, and it does not even remotely look like you or the general public expect it to look like. Meticulously assembled clips of clean recordings for scientific documentation and archival purposes. Ivan might have thought that at least for the initial release, It has to conform to certain visual expectations to gain traction. That's a really interesting thought, and I don't rule that thought out at all. You know, if you put out something that's too clean, people might assume that it's CGI. Now, obviously, all of us watching this video disagree. We're like, no, because then you can prove it's fake. That's terrible. It's a terrible idea. But at the time, this is 2011. This is prior to really having so many people on the internet understanding what, you know, raw footage looks like. It's a different time. So we do have to acknowledge that. And again, coming from the, you know, past autopsy video, which, you know, featured similar grain, he might have thought, maybe I have to spice it up for people to actually watch it. Number 2 is incompetence and naivety. Never underestimate human decision making and the possibility of bizarre reasoning, like I thought it looked cooler that way. And that, you know, you can't rule that out also. 3, planned degradation. The effect could have been an integral part of a hoaxing project to hide imperfections to limit production costs. Now, this is highly likely, in my opinion, if you are going to hoax something. Like, for instance, today, this is really interesting because now that we have AI video, if I want to mask something to make sure that you don't think it's AI, I might do so by adding in film, you know, blurs and scratches and moire and all of these different tactics, maybe a shaky camera, so that you can't pinpoint whether or not I have 6 fingers on my hand. Number 4 is blackmail. The leaker might have wanted to show just enough to make the original owner aware of the extent of the leak with the implicit threat of an uncontrolled release. Number 5, responsibility. Ivan might have tampered with the footage to initially keep it in a gray zone and gauge the reaction of the general public to determine how to move forward. 6, damage control. If the material was stolen from the Pentagon, as we mentioned before, or defense contractors, they might have decided to release heavily edited parts to jeopardize claims of authenticity in anticipation for the full material to surface at some point. This to me seems like it might be the most probable reason, meaning that the Defense Department, knowing full well that this stuff was out there, wanted to nip it in the butt. So created some type of like hoax-like footage, put it out there in case somebody backed this up somewhere and was going to release it. That I don't know. But it does seem like that's something they would attempt. The problem there is that if I was holding onto that footage and I saw some fake Skinny Bob footage out there, I'd be like, you got it all wrong. I've got the real footage. Check this out. So, you know, maybe. Number 7, ego. Ivan might have received a portion of the original footage with the condition to publish it only in an edited form so that releasing the full material remains a privilege of the actual source. And 8, power. Ivan might enjoy the feeling of being in possession of material other people would die for to get a hold of and create a teaser to feast on the begging for more content. Number 9, ambiguous provenance. Intentional obfuscation as a layer of abstraction and de-watermarking attempt in case of multiple distinct copies circulating among those in the know. I think that's also possible. If you look at whistleblowers today, whistleblowers in giant quotation marks, but if you look at people today going through the DOPSR sort of approved path to disclosure, they're often redacting a lot of what they put in books or what they say or what they put in writing or what they show. Even, you know, you look at FLIR footage, you look at photos that the Pentagon's released through Arrow, and they're all sort of redacted. It's all like small little chunks of something. It's blurry. It would seem like you don't want to release any national security threatening evidence or just information, so you might blur, cut, and, you know, shape things so that it doesn't actually harm national security. That's a possibility. And finally, the audio effects. Okay, so Ivan's videos are either on mute or emulate the sound of an old film projector to create the illusion that what is shown has been captured from a screening of old film reels. We're pretty sure this was not the case. As shown in the previous section, the audio might just be another stock effect. Red Dwarf B discussed it rudimentary, but without a conclusion. The problem in its simplicity and low information density with arbitrary tampering potential. It could come from anywhere, and it's easy to drag and drop an audio track as the other effects. If the stock film damage was not discovered, tracking down matching stock projector noises would be interesting. But now that we already know the stock effects were used, it's probably of no additional value. And I agree there. Whether he's filming it from a screen, like if somebody's actually projecting it, or if he added those sounds in post, is completely irrelevant at this point now that we know that the visual effects have been added in post-production. Now let's get all this straight. All the layers that are on the original footage, we can assume to be complete garbage, fake nonsense. I'm with you there. But what about the core? What about the video itself? What about the contents of the video? Are those fake? Well, this is where things get a little more interesting, and pardon the pun, becomes a bit of a gray area. So let's start with video 1. Video 1 features the tin bird, and it's a poetic description of the classical UFO looking like a metallic saucer we see in this very first clip. Contrary to what people think when watching the shaky video for the first time, the UFO is not flying along a trajectory, but actually hovering statically in the sky. We've got this, what looks to be reflective surface metallic football-shaped object. Now, I won't say disc because it does not look like a disc. It does from this angle, however, it might be a disc, but it looks like a football. And it's just kind of chilling there. It says, without context, the hovering object could be an oval tethered balloon. At first glance, it could also be mistaken for a blimp at a distance. So if you look at the blimp here, the image of the blimp, it does look like it could be that, but blimps usually do have fins and various protrusions. And so you would, expect to at least partially see some of that. And it says here, furthermore, blimps are typically huge, and the object we see is not much wider than one of the trees it's hovering above. Given the context, the object is an alien spacecraft. If Ivan presented the videos in chronological order, we hypothesize that the UFOs we see in the clips are actually identical. So first, it's in the air as shown in Tin Bird and Flying Twin, and later crashed on the ground in Blue Boys. The topology of the hull can be seen accurately in Blue Boys and allows for a comparison with a few good zoomed-in frames of the Flying Twin, revealing obvious similarities and thus supporting this hypothesis. Besides the UFO, the house is also interesting to analyze and could help narrowing down the geographical location the encounter took place in. So I will say, from my own eyeball, I find it interesting that although this stabilized image, it does feel like we are looking at the UFO, the camera's actually looking at the house. And if you had a UFO out there, unless the camera's clearly moving with the house. You see it in the frame following the house. Which, if the UFO was actually there, that's not what you'd be filming. Maybe it was a focus issue. I don't know. Here's the website says it needs your help. It says if you recognize this house, and hey, we have the whole internet here. It says please contact them. So reach out to myself or reach out to skinnybob.info. And here's a 3D reconstruction. Man, so proud of the internet with this stuff. So this is it here. A 3D construction of the house. Pretty remarkable, actually, that they were able to reconstruct that. And now they're saying because of the construction of the house and the trees and everything else, it seems like this might be like an Acadian or Cajun style house or a plantation mansion or a southern mansion. So like somewhere in New Orleans or that type of deal. You can see here as well the chimneys and the protrusions in the house. Also, they said when analyzing the house in the video, care must be taken to not mistake artifacts from post-processing effects as actual features of the house. So as you can see here, it looks a lot longer than it is. Fine. The vegetation as well. And look at this. They've even gone so far as to recreate the trajectory of where the camera is pointing. So they get an estimation of the path the camera traveled and thus a rough shape of the street or railroad track near the house. All of this, by the way, will just help you pinpoint exactly where this is, which, to my knowledge, hasn't been discovered yet. And I assume with people like Rainbolt or, ChatGPT, we might be able to find this one day. Now, the Flying Twin. This time, the UFO is not filmed from the ground as the Tin Bird, but from the sky and presumably from an airplane or early helicopter. So the name Flying Twin is a bit mysterious. It might refer to the situation in the sky where the aircraft is being accompanied by the UFO in close proximity. When pilots report UFO encounters, they often claim the UFO was mirroring their movements while maintaining a constant distance. Such maneuvering might have led to that title, Flying Twin. Also, the Germans developed an airplane apparently called Zwilling, which means twin. Is that the plane they're using? The United States Air Force Beechcraft Model 18 was also nicknamed Twin Beech. And specifically, the F-2 model was used for photographic reconnaissance. That seems a lot more likely. But also, 1942 was the first long-distance flight of a Sikorsky XR-4 helicopter, which took place in the United States. What if this historic flight attracted someone or something? If Flying Twin was actually filmed from a helicopter, it was not necessarily during this particular historic flight. For location-finding purposes, however, it might be interesting to follow the route described in the recollection of the pilot. So here you see basically a shaky camera operator filming this plane and sort of what to expect, which kind of, matches what we're seeing here. Look at this, man. Just look at that. Isn't that wild? Unbelievable. So the following image is a stitched panorama of the better Flying Twin frames showing the area we hope to eventually track down. So this is so cool. They've stitched together the frames. Look at this. Look at this. How incredible is this? They've mapped out the area using like computer graphics and using what little information they had. And so with that, they were able to determine that these are probably, either greenhouses or places for agricultural purposes, maybe places to, house a bunch of cows. It's also talking about the automobiles and the train wagons that go by. I mean, really, really interesting stuff. But now we have the first impression of an alien being. This one is a little hard to identify, as you can see, because of the low lighting. But there are several interesting movements and what appears to be uniform as well in this video. Looks like it's wearing like a turtleneck, but not quite, almost like a spacesuit. And it does look silvery and shiny, which is also, coincidentally or not coincidentally, what Guy Hoddle talked about in that memo. And so many others, by the way. So right here, it's saying that there might be some stuff in the background. And if you take a look at C and D here, it almost looks like it could be the craft in the background. But then it also might be a person, and a person might be more likely. And then that person might be holding a gun or antenna from a military backpack radio, both of which are a little hard to determine, I'll be frank, but the alien is interesting. So the next scene shows what could be the UFO seen in the Flying Twin and possibly the Tin Bird, but at this time as burning wreckage on the ground. As if it wasn't enough, there's also an alien body lying nearby, all right, for dramatic effect. So we have smoke obviously billowing from this craft, and then it pans to this alien just lying down. And this is probably one of the coolest things that they've done, in my opinion. An alternative video stabilization shows how the camera is rotating and captures the crash scene moving towards and orbiting around the body. So if you see here, it shows the entire scene. And if you stitch all that together, it kind of gives you this image here. So we see here, we have, some brush, we have the craft, and we have the body, all in one particular scene. Very interesting. You can also see the smoke section here. And, oh, this is cool. A faint lens flare. Might seem like nothing, but a lens flare proves that whatever's happening is happening in camera and is not done in post. Obviously, it could be done in post, but I mean, I don't think, given everything else, that would make sense. But maybe, who knows? But it makes sense with the movement. It says here, note that such flares generated inside the camera housing and depend on the angle a bright light source such as the sun is hitting the lens system. The clip above has been motion stabilized, resulting in the flares moving pretty much linearly. Ooh. So although it's shaky, the flare is moving linearly. That's interesting. So it turns out that this seemingly minor and overlooked effect is proof for an artificially induced camera shake. As a post-processing effect, the original footage should display a much more reasonable and calm camera handling. That's crazy. He added a camera shake effect in there, and you can tell because of the lens flare. That's so cool. So here, when stabilizing the whole scene, certain dark smudges turn out to be additional smoke and shadows casted by the plumes. So the smoke that's coming out here that we're seeing is actually casting shadows here. That is, beyond technical if you were to hoax this using CGI. Also, around the alien seem to be footprints coming from the direction of the UFO behind, telling the story that the alien climbed out of the wreckage, managed to walk away, but eventually collapsed. I feel sad for this little being. Just wanted to say that. So the alien lying there might not be dead. A closer look reveals that it's still moving. Look at the hand, folks. And this hand too. And the head. Oh my God. The finger of the right hand is likely contracting in A. The head appears to be rolling slightly in B. And the left hand appears to be twisting in C. Oh my God. That's crazy. Now, only in Blue Boys do we see the whole body in its entirety, including the feet and legs and head, which is extremely helpful in roughly estimating the height of Skinny Bob. And this is how it's done. They create a coarse digital model of the alien based on proportions. We have Skinny Bob standing under a statiometer later, which is like this measuring device that they had back in the 40s and 50s. And then they estimate the camera and the sun position to align with the torso and feet in the 2D image, and that's the result. So the result is this. Have a look at this, folks. Check this out here. We got the body. This is later in the footage when we look at the family vacation. The footage earlier in this video, and then the later Skinny Bob footage. They all match up. And they do that by looking at the thickness of the arms and the legs and comparing them, and that's how they sort of size them up, which is really smart. here is the Blue Boys meeting. So we're seeing an autopsy performed on an alien body. Assuming the original tape is longer than a few seconds Ivan provided, there might be more going on that causes the title Blue Boys meeting to make sense. Okay. And here is the stitched together panorama. Reveals the corpse as a whole. Here you go. The long arms. Look how long those arms are. And the face here. Tiny mouth, tiny nose, eyes that wrap around the side of the head. Exactly like what so many people describe. Also, it says that just like small details like the tablecloths back there is something that they had in the 40s. There's a dark spot on the glove the physician is wearing in his left hand. One single frame is focused just right to reveal more details. So random stains, perhaps 2-digit, resembling the number 98, maybe. That's a bit of a stretch. So anyways, this is just more corroborating evidence of, this stuff. This next video, well, have a look and we'll discuss it after. Now that's got to be the eeriest little video ever. When I remember when I first saw this video, I thought to myself, like that initial feeling was like, holy crap, I think this is real. And that feeling never really left me. Every time I see it, there's something in my gut that tells me it's real. Let me know. In the comments if you feel that too, intuitively speaking, not from evidence, just intuitively. You look at it and you're like, something about this creature, this being, seems like it's real. If a hoax, I mean, well done. Incredibly well done. Well, let's head to skinnybob.info to see if this is a hoax. So here, this is a more detailed clip of Skinny Bob featuring his entire body, featuring his, blinking, his hands twitching. Very, very strange. It says Ivan might have reversed the playback direction for dramatic effect so that the head appears last. One clue is the shaking of the camera, which could have been caused by the operator touching and preparing the camera on a tripod for pivoting. We take the liberty of showing the clip in reverse here, despite having no conclusive evidence. So that's a good guess. Close-up inspection of the blinking could further support or refute our suspicion of reverse playback. Okay, regardless if it's reverse, I don't think it matters. But yes, on A, it does seem to be reversed, and on B, it does. Okay, yeah, absolutely. Now, Skinny Bob's wearing a tight-fit jumpsuit. Looking good, Bob. Looking good, little Robert. He has some kind of crease on his chest. For more convenient analysis, we stitched the video together with frames. This is him in his entirety. Look at that. He does have some type of stitching going here. Look at those long fingers, man. Massive head. And somebody commented that this particular posture is called contrapposto, all right? Not a valuable addition to the investigation, but a welcome one nonetheless. Bet that guy's like, contrapposto, which means he's basically leaning on one leg. This is a detail here that is really interesting. So comparing the outfit from the one in the Blue Boys video, the previous one, the collar style is notably different. But another little detail, there appears to be 3 dots on the alien's right shoulder, almost like a logo. So according to the mysterious email correspondence, which we'll get into a little bit later, from Will, human clothes were provided. And Skinny Bob does not wear the original outfit here. Maybe it was him in Blue Boys, where he still wore the original outfit with a wider collar. Directly above the alien's head is a wedge-shaped object that appears to be a so-called stadiometer, commonly found in doctor's practice. So the second scene here shows Skinny Bob from the side as it moves and apparently interacts with something. So you can see him here kind of like reaching out right there, like reaching out for something. His shoulder moves here and he blinks like, man, I don't know about you, man, but this looks real to me. This looks like a chair back here, so he's probably sitting. And he doesn't seem to be alone in the room. So here, at one point, you see just a little bit right there, somebody maybe leaning in or somebody's arm or something. And then he's given something, I guess. And now they're trying to match whether that's like somebody's coat or whatnot. And they also said, according to the correspondence, this particular scene has been cropped, meaning it's been cut, maybe to obscure or to, cut out the person talking to Bob there. Some people say that the posture with the hands and the shirt and the curvature due to the fabric tension, and I don't know how they're getting all of this from one simple little, thing, but they said it seems like exactly like those sort of Eisenhower jackets, making me wonder, is this Eisenhower himself? I don't know. I don't know if I buy that. So the scene is cropped. People trying to evaluate the authenticity of Skinny Bob by close inspection of his movements often claim to clearly see some bad underlying Bezier curves used from digital animation. There are, in fact, occasions where the head moves in a jerky way. So it kind of like bobbles. You kind of see him a little bit. But they don't think that that gives away sort of a CG origin. Here's why. The other head movements are smooth. From all the non-trivial to implemental details we see in this and other scenes, smoothing out a major head rotation curve would be the least difficult thing to do. And Ivan's videos have frame rate issues, both repeated and drop frames, that impair motion. We don't know how aliens move is the last explanation. That's probably the best one. And here they're looking at the brow and sort of like how his eyes are moving and how here, look at the shadow move. And then it seems like he might have possible bruises or cuts on the forehead, meaning maybe this guy was the one that was laying down. And, man, they got individually shaped heads. Like, if you look at the heads here, like the cranial morphology shows like slightly different variants of heads. And he appears to have black fingernails. Bit of a gothic little Bob. Gothic Robert over here paints his nails black for some reason. Or they're just black, originally. But they do appear to be black. I will give you that. They are long and gangly. Are there only 4? There are only 4. That's something that's come up quite a bit in abductions as well. And black fingernails are apparently a part of obscure old UFO lore from 1995. What? Let me go ask ChatGPT. 2 notable references. One from J-Rod, mid-90s. J-Rod with black fingernails, a drawing in the mid-90s. So J-Rod is a famous alien that was brought up numerous times by different people. That was held at S4, and then the other one is Skinny Bob. So those are the 2 references there. So not much to go on. I wouldn't say that's too much of a big revelation there, but it is interesting. Now, this last part of the video is maybe one of the most bizarre pieces of the puzzle yet. It features what looks like almost like a lens of glasses that has symbols or shapes on it. It's pretty obscure and makes you wonder what it's for and why they would show to include it. Well, let's have a look. So this is from the scene called How to Drive. And it shows something barely recognizable. Given the context title and that we've seen a UFO before, this thing could be a control device for maneuvering an alien spacecraft. A closer look suggests it being some kind of glass plate with something casting a shadow on it. Now, that shadow to me almost looks like a person or something, but the lens itself, interesting if that is how you drive a UFO. And you can see that the actual etchings or whatever those symbols are casting shadows as well. So it's lying on a table, the camera's moving around it, and you're getting these shadows on this weird thing. Those are pretty clear. So these are like the interpretations that they're giving here. Very interesting. So here is a reference to the Krem alphabet from Reticuli, supposedly a fictional creation by Judy Falskog, a.k.a. James Van Grunen. But similar squiggly characters are seen on a copper plate allegedly dropped by a UFO in Edmonton, Canada in 1967. Well, that's interesting. So yeah, squiggly type writing. This also looks like Bill Herman's writing. Bill Herman was, someone who alleged to have been taken by UFOs and aliens and abducted and also channeled them to, he was like writing, things that they were giving him symbols. And then there's some embossing there. It's just kind of, dude, the length people have gone through to, kind of recreate this stuff is incredible. So that concludes video number 2 of the Skinny Bob saga. The most haunting one, perhaps, in my opinion. You see him blinking, which is like, I don't know, there's something uncanny valley about him, but it's not CGI. It's if anything, is really expensive animatronics, which, begs the question. Why? And why only there? Why not release something that you can make money off of if you're going to spend that much on animatronics? All questions that we're going to get to in a second. But first, let's have a look at this mysterious third video that doesn't feature the being at all. It features a message and a handprint. There we go. An ominous, bizarre message that says that you are the one who creates the misinformation. Tom Vernon, in the video trial of Skinny Bob, suggests that, this sounds a lot like something Richard Doty would say. Richard Doty, a famous, I would say, quote unquote, whistleblower who also was known for disseminating disinformation within the UFO community, that he would also get upset when people didn't believe him when he claimed he was telling the truth and saying, you're looking in the wrong direction. This isn't misinformation type deal. So I thought that was a good point to bring up from Tom there. All right, here we go. This is the handprint. We have the edge of the paper showing signs of wear, line presumably framing the area, and perhaps markings or redactions of pieces of tape. Okay. The forensic analysis, it says the visual quality of the picture is pretty good, suggesting that it might not originate from a scanned film frame, or if it does, that the original footage of this is high quality. It's also possible additional paperwork was attached to the films, including this photograph. So they're saying that, this might not originate from a video. If it does, and the video is really high quality, or they might have attached that, kind of like what they do with, when they brief you in police offices and stuff, or when they put you through whatever. So they might have, because it's, in a government facility, they might have just, I don't know. Maybe they had to fingerprint him because he came in drunk, crashed his saucer on Earth, and they were like, dude, Skinny Bob, what are you doing? And they processed him, took his fingerprints, threw him in a drunk tank. That theory has yet to be debunked, just saying. So the hand of Skinny Bob can be seen in several clips. When we try to straighten the fingers and compare it to the hand, it looks like a good match, okay? So that's pretty cool that they've kind of taken his side view and measured it out. And that's pretty much it when it comes to that video. So not much to go on, just kind of him being salty. The material does not belong to any film, video game, television series. We know this. No one who is out of this may prove to be the owner of this material. No one who is out of this can prove he has in his possession the original material. So he's saying that if the comments say, hey, that's my video, that's probably not true. And then the revelation of further material will depend on the events and people, is something he says as well. You are the ones who reject this material. Maybe you are looking in the wrong direction. Yeah. Sounds like somebody's kind of upset about the response. He's like, I gave you the Holy Grail and you guys are making fun of me? Well, dude, don't edit these videos so heavily next time. Internet's still going to say it's fake, no matter what. Final video, folks. This is the final one, and quite a happy one, I will say. This is family vacation, all right? But not your typical family vacation. No siree, Bob. This is a vacation with gray aliens, possibly from Zeta Reticuli. Have a look at this video. The description says, family vacation, tape 6. From the first contact in 1942, a series of diplomatic visits to discuss matters of mutual concern were planned. Under the treaty 2304, these meetings would take place in secrecy. A limited number of special agents would escort the visitors, and they would only meet high-ranking officers. According to the document 072/E, at the meeting of 1961, there was an incident involving 3 subjects due to the violation of the agreement by the officers at the military base when they discovered that their arrival was being filmed with a hidden device without their consent. Under the treaty 2304, the meetings would be confidential and filming or taking photographs would not be allowed. After the incident, the treaty was revised. Now, there is a famous treaty out there that we refer to as the Greada Treaty. There's also another meeting that happened that I think it was astronaut Gordon Cooper who talked about a meeting.
Small saucer apparently flew overhead and put down some landing gear and landed out on the dry lake bed only about 50 yards out. And these were old pro cameramen who were used to flying in all kinds of vehicles to take all kinds of pictures. And so they picked up their cameras and started over toward it, and going to get some close-ups. And with that, it lifted up, put the gear back in, and at a very high rate of speed disappeared.
Did you ever see the film?
I saw the negatives, yeah.
And yeah, the other one was the meeting at Holloman Air Force Base in 1965, allegedly as well, where these aliens came down and met with high-ranking officials. And apparently, they were filmed without their consent. And the result is a few of these aliens, God, they look creepy, looking at the camera, talking to each other. There seems to be other people walking by, and they're kind of like, you can tell they're giving you a look like, hey, put that camera down. Let's get into the analysis here. Family vacation. So this clip being the only one in color. Now this is interesting that we have a color clip, meaning there's probably other color clips, meaning also it's probably taken at a later date. This might not be our little Bob in question. The clip being the only one in color, and therefore presumably from a later production date, features multiple alien beings at once. They are walking alongside a wall and are accompanied by humans. The name family vacation could refer to the aliens in a sense that they came and visited as a group. Another possibility is a connection to the infamous dentist visit of Dwight D. Eisenhower on his vacation in Palm Springs of February 20th, 1954, suggesting that President Eisenhower took a family vacation but was actually brought to meet these aliens at a meeting. It's challenging to keep track of how many entities we see in total. So it goes from 2, 3, 4, maybe 4. A few frames show the floor, and one frame is focusing on the wall, revealing the surface, its surface structure. So it kind of looks like rough concrete. Now, the metadata he provides associated with the video clips. So it says here it appears to be divided into 7 tapes, and those again are divided into cases. If a tape refers to video 8 or high 8 or digital 8 cassettes, the tape duration is 180 minutes, suggesting PAL, which is a European video standard. Oh. They're saying here, the feedback was like some type of emotional response. He seems to be annoyed by people speculating about the origin of the tapes. Curiously, he was the one that put the insignia of the KGB in the front of the first clip and is now claiming that there is not any reference which may link the material to any organization that is working today in the material exposed. So he's either contradicting himself or added working today on purpose to indicate that at least the modern KGB is not involved. And here it says, don't underestimate the human factor, assuming that someone's sitting on a treasure trove and deciding to slowly release it to the public, expecting overwhelming reactions and gratitude, but receiving the opposite. The person might now be upset and decides to cancel disclosure for the undeserving public. That, seems like something, that would happen in today's internet culture. So now let's get to this mysterious email. So Will from Planet Under Attack claims to have contacted Ivan, or at least someone affiliated with the videos via email on June 17th, 2014, and received a response 2 days later. He says, secondly, do you happen to know who the copyright holder is for the Skinny Bob footage? I'm also wondering who is the original leaker of the footage. Somebody told me this footage originally came through you. Any info would be great. Regardless, thanks again, my friend, Will. His response, we were sent that footage to release from a source. The same source that sent us blank. I know it's the original source because the original version is not available to anyone. That's why you won't find it anywhere on the internet. We released the footage using several SOC channels on YouTube and other sites. We did it this way to make sure the info got out, even if our channel, website, etc. was terminated. Blank granted copyright as long as we did not profit by it or release the full unedited version as a complete film. Only short clips were released, not the full 12 minutes of footage, for example. Oh, wait, so hold on. So someone affiliated with the videos responded. Sorry about that. For example, the clip where the alien is sitting down is cropped. The full scene shows him sitting at the table, looking through what looks like star maps. Government officials are also seen at the opposite side of the table in clothes of the time. The clothes it's wearing are explained at the beginning of the footage, too. Full footage shows original clothing. The jumper and trousers are not the original clothes. Original clothes were taken for analysis. Human clothes were provided. Alien can be seen wearing a dull silver type ski suit with a utility belt and dull silver footwear. I'm hoping the source will allow us to release the full unedited footage at some point, but I cannot release without permission. In this game, mutual trust is everything. Hope this helps, and you're welcome. Dang. So purely anecdotal, unverifiable. They still decided to include the email. Totally fine. The person replying claims the original footage is 12 minutes long, and a previous description told recording the duration of 1260 minutes is mentioned, and most of the timestamps exceed 12 minutes. That's a significant discrepancy. Yeah, okay. This is interesting here. There's a documentary that recreates the meeting of aliens with humans in front of a wall at Area 51. It's the 1970s now, so this clip is in color. The similarity of family vacation is striking. Huh. This is also a totally different case that I was looking into. This is close to here, the Rivière Rouge, or L'Assomption, in 1992. These creatures were just found on some type of ski trail, like a snowmobiling trail. And there were photos. There's a video of the photos and of some of the people there, but no one ever claimed responsibility for these. No one came out and said, those are mine. So there's no provenance. There's no, there's nothing to go on except for the general location of these. But they do seem to match Skinny Bob, definitely. First, okay, so let's talk about the arguments. So many claim that the material is obviously fake, but usually fail to elaborate for why exactly that is, and others find it totally authentic and base this claim on how Bob blinks. We approach the big question in a more rigorous way by compiling a list of pros and cons first. So, unresolved for more than a decade. Now, going on 15 years almost. No credible claims of authorship, so no one's taken responsibility for this. No one has said, hey, that was me, I have those puppets, or that was all my work. There is highly diverse content. So again, we're talking about many different types. It's not just a one piece of footage, which in itself would be pretty compelling. Arguably, even more compelling. I don't know. But it's interesting that so many different varying clips of color from the sky, from a car, like, I mean, all these different clips, very interesting. No commercial use despite production costs. So assuming that this cost a lot of money to recreate, whether it's animatronics, whether it's costumes, or whether it's CGI, it did cost money. At some point, it cost somebody a lot of time, and time is money. But no commercial use. There were never any ads on these videos. Unless this guy's selling like Skinny Bob, dolls on Etsy. I don't know how he's making money. The underlying footage, essentially flawless. So the footage itself, not the edited, stuff that's put over as a filter, but the stuff that the core footage is flawless. Quality preventing consensus among experts about hoaxing techniques. Yep, okay. Hoaxer would have taken an unnecessary risk by showing a potential recognizable house and aerial view. Why would he risk showing that? There's a map, essentially, that he shows. When he shows the aerial view or he shows the house, he would risk being called out as a hoaxer if that footage exists out there, or if that, person that living there comes out and says, no, this is my house and that was my footage. I don't know. Irrelevant yet costly details presented in a barely recognizable way. The table behind the operation that had a cloth on it, or the UFO and the smoke, and then the smoke billowing, casting a shadow. You barely recognize that unless you really zoomed in and slowed it down. So yeah, that seems a little odd that you would go through great lengths to have these tiny little details. Not impossible, just unlikely. And not a single unresolved hoax contender of comparable quality. Meaning, there has not been any other unresolved footage that meets this quality. Think about it. There's nothing on the internet that meets this in quality that is unresolved. That alone should be cause for pause. Now let's go to the cons. Occasionally jerky movements of Skinny Bob. So as we talked about, there's like these glitchy things, although we also said that could be due to dropped frames, and we don't know how aliens move. Stereotypical presentation of UFO artifacts with alien symbols. Again, that could be because that's what it is. I mean, it seems to be that way with the Aztec crash. It seems to be that way with many other sightings and encounters and abductions. Extremely short and shaky clips, signs of intentional eye obfuscation, limiting hoaxing efforts. That I will concur with. I think that is definitely, if you were trying to obfuscate whatever someone's looking at, you would 100% make it shaky, add effects over it. But it's so wild that the effects and the shakiness seem so blatant, like blatantly overlaid compared to the insane amount of effort that went into creating the animatronics or makeup or whatever that may be. Convenient placement of the alien body next to the UFO, looking staged. Skinny Bob's physique being suspiciously compatible to a human child. I don't know, if I saw a human child with that physique, I would probably drop kick them because I would be like, you're an alien in disguise. Both plot and aesthetic similarities to a documentary aired 14 years earlier. That's this documentary that they're showing. Yep. True. It's saying that the plot is similar to this movie that came out 14 years prior. It had alien symbolism, human interrogator, the strange symbols on the how to drive thing, the inspection of the alien, somebody filming like this, maybe the autopsy scene, and then obviously the meeting here. Again, maybe that's based on real stuff. The best way to cover it up is to lean into it, I think. Then we have the potential overestimation of production costs, meaning like, what if this person made everything using chicken skin and bread, right? And then we're just overestimating, oh, this doesn't actually cost $100,000. This costs $50 in a trip to Walmart or whatever. And then the possible fallacy of mistaking circumstantial evidence for planned details. Okay. Meaning the convenient placement of things and all of okay, yeah, I would agree with that. So here are the current theories. There's a leak theory where parts of the footage show a professional environment, autopsy room, examination room with a stadiometer, aircraft, suggesting that it's not a collection of amateur home video clips, but rather a documentation produced by a government agency branch or military or corporation. It could have found its way to the internet by a whistleblower with legitimate access leaking it. Could have been stolen, like by the leak in 2011. And the other theory here is that it's a hoax. Here's someone that used the same tactics and techniques to create what seems to be like a floating UFO, using the same lines and driving a car. But the general consensus is that multiple people, multiple techniques, and possibly, but not necessarily, a lot of money was involved. And it's unlikely for a single person to pull this off due to the complexity and variety of these scenes, which I agree with. There's a lot going on here for one person to do all that. But hey, I'm alone kind of in doing all this, except for this video. This video is actually being edited by something else. Shout out Lee, editing the first full Area 52 video. But normally I'm a one-man team, and I know what you can get away with by yourself, so it's actually quite surprising. Claims frequently made by individuals about the clips being easy to reproduce remain to be demonstrated. So we disagree, but encourage people that have done this, that have the time, skill, and motivation to give it a try. They have an email where you can submit the results. Just don't forget about the 71% of content beside the Skinny Bob close-ups, right? So you can do one of these things, maybe like this person here, like the Tin Bird using the Boris effects. Even that doesn't look too real, like there's something unnatural about it, but it's a good effort. So people saying puppeteering, animatronics, costumes, computer graphics, motion tracking, stop motion, all of these things would have had to be used at some point to create this effect. And here, if you were to use a costume, I mean, the hands wouldn't match up. You can see that here. The face would actually match up. That would be a decent costume for Halloween, I tell you that. Now, there is something also that should be discussed, and that is this article written by Noah Raddick in July of 2024 says a Skinny Bob is not CGI, and by applying a technique known as ELA, which stands for Error Level Analysis. Okay, error level analysis is a method used to check for markers of CGI manipulation. It involves saving images or video frames at different levels of compression and mapping the differences. This is able to show areas that were edited or inserted in post, such as a face swapping, object added, CGI effects, etc. So by doing this ELA technique, you'll be able to see now, if you do the ELA technique onto a scene from Shrek, as you see here, clear outlines are given, right, where these have been added in artificially into this scene. Skinny Bob, however, as you can see, not enough to indicate a clear outline like for Shrek or other CGI. Other Skinny Bob can be examined frame by frame. This frame of Skinny Bob during an interview with his inlaid eyes and broad and deep head. He has a small mouth and small nose, which is typical of traditional gray. The ELA has some slight outlines, but not enough to prove it was modified. Only a part of his body is outlined with some noise, and not the rest. It's indicative that Skinny Bob has not been modified at all, and no processing has been done. If he were CGI, he'd have to be created in one go and not modified at all, which is not usually how most CGI is created. One conclusion that I don't agree with in the original analysis is that there was post-processing done to the videos. I don't see evidence for that. It should show up under ELA unless it was intentionally obscured. A program like After Effects or Photoshop would save the file at a different compression level, which would show up usually on the ELA. One problem with this is the second Skinny Bob was saved as PNG rather than JPEG, which is not compressed. However, it seems there was no apparent serious manipulation in the JPEG of Skinny Bob 1 either. The original was likely saved in a compressed video format like MPEG, so it would have compression artifacts. So again, noise pattern on CGI image, noise pattern on alien image. They don't match. Irregular patterns of noise indicative of camera noise rather than structured noise. Folks, are we looking at a real alien here? It's kind of insane. It's kind of intense that that's what we might be dealing with, at least one of the types. There are a lot of connections to be made with Skinny Bob, especially if you look at Psalm 1 or the Special Operations Manual from Majestic 12. They talked about Eben Type 1 and Eben Type 2, this clearly being more of a Type 2 situation here. We can look at the Type 2 description, actually. Give me a second. This is the EBE Type 2 extraterrestrial biological entity as described by the Special Operations Manual for MJ12 that was apparently, leaked to Dom Berliner in 94, I believe. No, prior to that. Would have been 94. I don't know. Regardless. The size and build, these entities were small, standing between 3 feet 5 inches and 4 foot 2 inches. This seems to check. Head and skull, they have proportionally large skulls, much larger and longer than those of either humans or EB Type 1. The skull features an extreme peak extending above the top of the head. Now, they did show tiny little bumps there. The eyes are very large and slanted, almost reach the side of the head. The pupils are completely black with no visible whites. There is no expressiveness in the face. Nose is minimal, just 2 small slits. Now, this did seem to have a bit of a bigger nose here, and there's no external ear structure visible. Skin and appearance, the skin is described as pale blue-gray, which we can't really confirm, and the limbs are longer relative to the legs. The arms are longer relative to the legs. Hands possess 3 long tapered fingers plus an opposable thumb, almost as long as the toes. Notably, the middle finger is more robust, but not as long as the index finger. Okay. Legs and feet, the legs are small and slender, and the feet have 4 toes joined by webbing. That does sound a lot like the Type 2s, which would make sense if, whatever was in the MJ12 documents was accurate, and this was real. That's kind of what this would look like, this situation here. So folks, I hope you enjoyed this video. That concludes our review of the Skinny Bob videos 1, 2, 3, and 4 posted by Ivan1035. Ivan, if you're out there, if you're watching this, I would love to talk to you, even in private. Reach out to me, find a way. I look forward to the day that this guy posts one more video, gives us anything, any little piece of the puzzle at all, or just tells us that, hey, it's a big joke, it's a big farce, it's a really expensive hoax that I never took credit for. What do you guys think? Tell me what you think and if your mindset maybe shifted slightly from the beginning of this investigation to the end of it? Do you find yourself now more convinced or less convinced that these videos are authentic? Do you think Skinny Bob is real? Do you think aliens are real, but the Skinny Bob video is fake? I would love to hear your interpretations of all this information. And clearly, we skimmed through a lot of it. If you want to go and have a look for yourself, go to skinnybob.info. A lot of pertinent information on that website. Plus, there are tons of videos out there looking at this, analyzing it forensically. And if there's anything that I missed, or if there's a geographical pin that you might have come across, please let me know. Reach out, hit us up in the Discord. We'll be hanging out there. I appreciate you guys watching, and thank you for entertaining this much different style of.
When I was around 13 years old, my older sister had just gotten her driver's license, and
I'm gonna be right back.
we used to wait for my dad to fall asleep, and we'd basically steal the car and go out joyriding at night. Well, this one night, we went out. On the way back, my sister's like, let's just go the back roads. I feel like going by my friend's house. So we're going the back roads, and on the right-hand side, in somebody's front yard, we see this giant black disc. This thing is about half the size of a house in height, about the width of a house. My sister pulled over. We're just looking at each other incredulously, and I decided to get out of the car. I start making a beeline towards this object, and I get about 25, 30 yards from it, and this thing just hops up off the ground in a split second. It was on the ground, and then a second later, it's like 2 feet off the ground. And it starts to slowly ascend in front of me. It's completely quiet, gets to the top of the tree line, and then in a split second, it just shoots off into the clouds.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Area 52 podcast. My name is Chris Ramsey, and today we're going to be taking a very, very deep dive into the Special Operations Manual of a group known as the Majestic 12. And if you're wondering what the Majestic 12 is, fret not. The gentlemen behind me here on these little Polaroids are actually part of a top secret group that was put together to control, contain, and explore the UFO.
I'll be right back. I have my water. Back.
Extraterrestrial biological entity presence that has been communicating and interacting with our planet since the late 1940s. I highly suggest you go check out the video that I've already done, kind of deep diving into each individual on this list and the purpose of the Majestic 12 themselves and what their role is in all of this. The manual allegedly came out in 1954, but was not leaked until 1994 to a gentleman by the name of Don Berliner. There were Tri-X negatives mailed to Mr. Don Berliner, postmarked on March 7th, 1994. Now, the document we are going to be reading is a replica of the one that was photographed by an unknown person that was submitted on, this reel of photos. The MJ-12 debate goes pretty deep among UFO researchers, and people flip-flop back and forth. I've been looking forward to reading through this document, and I can't wait to do it with you all today. All right, folks, we paid the bills. If you don't mind, leave a like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave us a favorable review on Spotify or iTunes or wherever it is you listen to these podcasts. Most of his career really looking into this and proving or trying to disprove the authenticity of the MJ-12 documents. Him, along with Stanton Friedman and many others, had their go at these specific documents. Ryan Woods, I think, went the deepest. And he has his report available on specialoperationsmanual.com, which I'll leave the link to below, where he details his forensic analysis on some of the things that might help prove the authenticity of these documents, which would be absolutely earth-shattering. Before we get into reading, I'm just going to go over a few of the bullet points that Ryan Woods has found through his research proving the authenticity of these documents. So in short, forensic analysis of the language, font, and original photographic film prove that the document was produced in or around 1954. And that's according to Woods' research and expert witnesses he's contacted at the National Archive. The manual, however, did not become public until 1994. We know this where it was leaked to Mr. Berliner. Now, in the manual, they specifically talk about Area 51, S4, Site 4. Now, Bob Lazar only came public in 1989, so that would have been a full 5 years prior to this document coming out, which does raise a little bit of suspicion, obviously. But put that aside for a second, here are some things that corroborate the 1954 production of this document. So, the manual was sent anonymously to Don Berliner in 1994, but the documents were sent as images on a film, and that film was authenticated to 1954 based on its type of underdeveloped 35mm Tri-X. Number 2, the detailed packaging procedures for the recovered EBEs and craft specifically mention craft tape, not duct tape, which is accurate to 1954 shipping methods. Okay. The packaging procedures spell out screwdriver as 2 words, which was customary in 1954, but not today. Okay. Similarly, first aid was capitalized in 1954, but the U.S. custom changed to lowercase first aid in the late 1950s. Similarly, again, the control sentence on one of the pages specifies N.Mex for New Mexico, when the modern abbreviation would be NM. Number 3, the only typo in the document is desiccant, spelt with 2 C's not two S's, suggesting the document underwent thorough manual editing, but not computer-based editing, since a spell checker would have caught the mistake automatically. Next up, the letter Z. The letter Z is raised from the other text, indicating the printed document came from a hot lead printing press appropriate to 1954, and not a more modern monotype press, which does not have the same problem with a raised Z. The Z button was not used frequently as the other letters, and unfrequently used letters like the Z got crud on the brass slugs in the press, leading to the letter being raised above the others. Very interesting. So the raised Z matches other Army manuals at the time. Okay. If you want to read more detailed, obviously more granular research that Mr. Ryan Woods has put together, head over to that website if you're still feeling a little bit skeptical. But for now, I invite you to put that skepticism aside, suspend your disbelief, and come with me as we dive deep into 1954 and take a look at the Special Operations Manual for Extraterrestrial Entities and Technology Recovery and Disposal of the Majestic 12. Cover letter's got all types of warning. Again, this is a transcription of the original here. It says this is a top secret Magic Eyes only document containing compartmentalized information essential to the national security of the United States. Eyes only accessed to the material herein is strictly limited to personnel possessing Magic 12 clearance level. Examination or use by an unauthorized personnel is strictly forbidden and punishable by federal law. Okay. Which would be interesting, wouldn't it? It's interesting that they put that little thing in there. If you read this and you're not authorized, it's punishable by law. But then you would have to admit that the program exists. So it is kind of silly that they write that. First and foremost, I will say that is a silly thing. Please arrest someone for reading this and charge them with reading this specific document. That would be great. That would be a great way to get disclosure. And by the way, if you want to watch another deep dive into the MJ12 stuff, I highly suggest you go subscribe to my friend UAP Gerb. He goes deeper than anybody else into the military's involvement with extraterrestrials. So the first page here talks about the removal and or replacement of pages attached to the document requires written authorization from the Magic 12 operations officer and will be recorded by the document's records officer for each instance. Okay. Gives you a few dates here. Nothing we're going to deep dive into right now. Another warning page. Here we have a bit of an index of what's to come in this document. So section 1, the project purpose and goals. 1, the scope. This manual has been prepared especially for Majestic 12 units. Its purpose is to present all aspects of Majestic 12 so authorized personnel will have a better understanding of the goals of the group, be able to more expertly deal with unidentified flying objects, extraterrestrial technology, and entities, and increase the efficiency of future operations. Number 2, general. MJ12 takes the subject of UFOBs. Now, UFOB was the proper acronym that people would use to describe UFOs back then, so if you're ever searching the CIA archive, and if you type in UFOs, you probably won't get much, but UFOB, you'll get quite a bit of results popping up. And if you're wondering what does the B stand for, it's simply object. So they use the O and the B. So like a UFOB, the O and the B would stand for object. MJ12 takes the subject of the UFOB's extraterrestrial technology and extraterrestrial biological entities very seriously and considers the entire subject to be a matter of the very highest national security. For that reason, everything relating to the subject has been assigned the very highest security classification. 3 main points will be covered in this section. A, the general aspects of MJ12 to clear up any misconceptions that anyone may have. B, the importance of the operation. And C, the need for absolute secrecy in all phases of the operation. 3, security classifications. All information relating to MJ12 has been classified Magic Eyes only and carries a security level 2 points above that of top secret. The reason for this has to do with the consequences that may arise, not only from the impact upon the public should the existence of such matters become general knowledge, but also the danger of having such advanced technology as has been recovered by the Air Force fall into the hands of unfriendly foreign powers. No information is released to the public press, and the official government position is that no such special group as MJ12 exists. Also interesting to note that the badge that Bob Lazar had while working at S4 had the letters MAJ on the badge. This is not an official replica of the badge, but in the new Project Gravator movie that's coming out, S4, the Bob Lazar story, they do replicate that badge, so you can see what that looked like according to Bob's memory. Number 4, history of the group. Operation Majestic 12 was established by Special Classified Presidential Order on 24th of September 1947 at the recommendation of Secretary of Defense James V. Forrestal and Dr. Vannevar Bush, Chairman of the Joint Research and Development Board. Operations are carried out under a top-secret research and development intelligence group directly responsible to the President of the United States. The goals of the MJ12 group are as follows. A, recovery for scientific study of all materials and devices of foreign or extraterrestrial manufacture that may become available. Such material and devices will be recovered by any and all means deemed necessary by the group. That's terrifying. right off the bat, just like any means necessary. B, the recovery for scientific study of all entities and remains of entities not of terrestrial origin, which may become available through independent action by those entities or by misfortune or military action. C, the establishment and administration of top secret teams to accomplish the above operations. So far, recovering absolutely everything that has to do with aliens by any means necessary. Pretty much your standard clause for a top secret, group that moves in the shadows and works on black budget only. D, the establishment and administration of special secure facilities located at locations within the continental borders of the United States for the receiving, processing, analysis, and scientific study of any and all materials and entities classified as being extraterrestrial origin by the group of the special teams. Now, we do know of some of these bases located around the United States, namely S4, Site 4, where Bob Lazar worked, but we also hear about Dulce in New Mexico, about the famous, Phil Schneider sort of underground firefight that happened with the EBEs, and possibly many other places in the United States that have underground military facilities harboring, deconstructing, reverse engineering, and working on a lot of these projects. E, establishment and administration of covert operations to be carried out in concert with Central Intelligence to effect the recovery for the United States of extraterrestrial technology and entities which may come down inside the territory of or fall into the possession of foreign powers. And F, the establishment and maintenance of absolute top secrecy concerning all the above operations. Number 5, the current situation. It is considered, as far as the current situation is concerned, that there are few indications that these objects and their builders pose a direct threat to the security of the United States, despite the uncertainty as to their ultimate motives in coming here. Certainly, the technology possessed by these beings far surpasses anything known to modern science, yet their presence here seems to be benign, and they seem to be avoiding contact with our species, at least for the present. Several dead entities have been recovered along with a substantial amount of wreckage and devices from the downed craft, all of which are now under study at various locations. No attempt has been made by the extraterrestrial entities either to contact authorities or to recover their dead counterparts or downed craft, even though one of the crashes was the result of a direct military action. The greatest threat at this time arises from the acquisition and study of such advanced technology by foreign powers unfriendly to the United States. It is for this reason that the recovery and study of this type of material by the United States has been given such a high priority. Now, I completely understand that. That is something I think we can all get behind in 1954. This is Cold War era, post-World War II. Tensions were still incredibly high as we had just developed the first nuke and deployed it. And now we're all kind of sitting back and wondering, do the Russians have this? Are they going to fight back and retaliate? So this type of technology in the wrong hands could have been absolutely devastating. Could still be devastating, but especially back then. It's so crazy to just let your mind sit in 1954 with, this type of material if you were read into it. It is one thing to be told today, or shown even, that UFOs exist and that aliens are real, right? But we have so much preliminary cognitive padding when it comes to the UFO subject through science fiction, through even newspapers, TV shows, podcasts like the one you're listening to right now, that the amount of shock would have to be dampened. Like the shock of something like this back then would have been insurmountable and unfathomable for anybody. 1948 was when the helicopter was made public, was flown publicly. So in 1947, the helicopter was actually advanced military technology. So you're going from 1948, seeing a helicopter for the first time, to potentially being face to face with beings from a non-earthly origin and their technology. I mean, it must shatter your paradigm so much. Chapter 2, Introduction. 6, the scope. 6A, this operation manual is published for the information and guidance of all concerned. It contains information on determination, documentation, collection, and disposition of debris, devices, craft, and occupants of such craft as defined as extraterrestrial technology or extraterrestrial biological entities, EBEs, in Section 2 of this chapter. B. Appendix 1-1A contains a list of current references, including technical manuals and other available publications applicable to these operations. And C. Appendix 2 contains a list of personnel who comprise the Majestic 12 group. 7. Forms and records. So forms used for reporting and operation are listed in Appendix 1. Section 2 of Chapter 2. The definition and data. 8. General. Extraterrestrial technology is defined as followed. A. Aircraft identified as not manufactured in the United States or any terrestrial foreign powers, including experimental military or civilian craft. Aircraft in this category are generally known as unidentified flying objects, or UFOBs. Such aircraft may appear as one of several shapes and configurations and exhibit extraordinary flight characteristics. B. Objects and devices of unknown origin or function, manufactured by processes or of materials not consistent with current technology or scientific knowledge. Okay. Well, that's interesting. See, they define extraterrestrial technology here as a devices of unknown origin or function, manufactured by processes or materials not consistent with current technology or scientific knowledge. So they're not saying that the ET technology couldn't be manufactured here on Earth. C. Wreckage of any aircraft thought to be of extraterrestrial manufacture or origin. Such wreckage may be the result of accidents or military action. D. Materials that exhibit unusual and or extraordinary characteristics not consistent with current technology or scientific knowledge. And then EBEs are described as A. Creatures, humanoids or otherwise, whose evolutionary process responsible for their development are demonstrably different from those postulated or observed in Homo sapiens. All right, next we're going to go into the description of the craft and then the description of the aliens. 9. Description of craft. Documented extraterrestrial craft, UFOBs, are classified in one of 4 categories based on general shape as follows. Now, this is interesting. We got Skywatcher and the whole team, coming up with 9 classifications for UFOs, which, by the way, not one of them is a disc. We've seen flying saucers and discs since the late 1940s, and yet one of the 9 classifications of UFOs that they have, none of them are discs. So A, elliptical or disc-shaped. This type of craft is of metallic construction and dull aluminum in color. They have the appearance of 2 pie pans or shallow dishes pressed together and may have a raised dome on the top or bottom. No seams or joints are visible on the surface, giving the impression of one-piece construction. Discs are estimated from 50 to 300 feet in diameter, and the thickness is approximately 15% of the diameter, not including the dome, which is 30% of the disc diameter and extends another 4 to 6 feet above the main body of the disc. Really interesting here that we're talking about a potential 300-foot disc. Now, 1954, what makes them think, other than having direct eyewitness, that one of these craft would be 300 feet? Yeah, does that mean they've recovered a 300-foot craft? Now, I believe a few years ago, Ross Coulthard had alluded to some type of giant UFO that was way too big for them to move, so they had to build a base around it.
So big, they built a building over it in a country outside of the United States of America.
Since then, people have been scouring the internet looking for buildings that might be under heavy military protection that stand out as potentially harboring this giant UFO. And recently, in Korea, there is this building, and I'll put it up here, that's 265 feet wide, built of stone and concrete, and surrounded by an 8-foot barbed wire fence. The signs mark it as belonging to the South Korea's Aviation Authority, and it has navigational equipment mounted on top. Other models of this antenna platform can be seen elsewhere in South Korea, and the equipment for them does not extend below the platform, meaning the equipment is only built atop the building in question. The purpose of the building itself is unexplained. Now, the building itself looks to be like 50 to 70 years old. Very, very interesting that this is a big, round building atop a mountain, which you could potentially, build into. I don't know. Is that what we're talking about here? We're talking about a 300-foot craft? That would be cool. That would be a cool connection. We carry on with the description of the UFOB. The dome may or may not include windows or ports, and ports are present around the lower rim of the disc in some instances. Most disc-shaped craft are equipped with lights on the top and bottom, and also around the rim. These lights are not visible when the craft is at rest or not functioning. There are generally no visible antenna or projections. Landing gear consists of 3 extendable legs, ending in circular landing pads. When fully extended, this landing gear supports the main body 2 to 3 feet above the surface at the lowest point. A rectangular hatch is located along the equator or on the lower surface of the disc. So we're talking about standard flying saucer sci-fi type discs here. Interesting that they said there's no protrusions or antennas. The UFO that Bob worked on, I think, was specifically said to have, a 3 or 4 foot antenna above it. B, fuselage or cigar shaped. We hear about these a lot from pilots, by the way, these specific ones. Documented reports of this type of craft are extremely rare. Air Force radar reports indicate they're approximately 2,000 feet long and 95 feet thick. What? 2,000 feet? That's massive. My God. Let's calculate this in American metrics. How many fridges wide is 2,000 feet?
If we assume a standard fridge is about 3 feet wide, then 2,000 feet would be roughly 677 fridges lined up side by side.
677 fridges long, folks. That is incredible. That is incredible. And apparently they do not operate in the lower atmosphere. Okay. Very little information is available on the performance of these craft, but radar reports have indicated speeds in excess of 7,000 miles an hour. They do not appear to engage in the violent and erratic maneuvers associated with the smaller types. Violent? What? I assume they're only being violent because we're attacking them first. I don't know. C. Ovoid or circular shape. Orbs, if you will. This type of craft is described as being shaped like an ice cream cone, being rounded at the large end and tapered to a near point on the other end. Okay, wait, so this is like a teardrop shape. This is what actually John Ramirez on the latest podcast kind of described too. Very interesting. Egg-shaped, if you will. They're approximately 30 to 40 feet long, and the thick end diameter is approximately 20% of the length. There is an extremely bright light at the pointed end, and this craft usually travels point down. They can appear to be any shape from round to cylindrical, depending upon the angle of observation. Often sightings of this type of craft are elliptical craft, seen at an inclined angle or edge on. So that is interesting too, that the angle of which you're looking at this egg-shaped craft might change your, analysis of what that craft might be. And that, I think, is fair to say. From Commander Fravor to Chris Bledsoe to all these other cases, we hear about either a tic-tac, oval, cigar, round. Maybe that's just the angle at which we're seeing it, especially if there are no seams. Looking at it from a certain angle and plus the bright light might give off that effect. Very interesting. And finally, D, airfoil or triangular shaped. Whoa, this is 1954, folks. We're not talking, I don't think we're talking about TR-3A or TR-3B, but maybe. 1954 is an interesting time to be talking about triangular shaped craft. This craft is believed to be new technology due to the rarity and recency of observations. Radar indicates an isosceles triangle profile, the longest side being nearly 300 feet in length. Little is known about the performance of these craft due to the rarity of good sightings. They are believed to be capable of high speeds and abrupt maneuvers similar to or exceeding the performance attributed to the types of A and C. Whoa. Interesting that they say this is a new type of craft. So new to them, or perhaps it's their own craft and they're kind of inserting it into here to, help the propagation of some type of blue beam project. Who knows? 10. Description of extraterrestrial biological entities. Here we go, folks. We're talking about aliens. Examinations of remains recovered from wreckage of UFOBs indicate that EBEs may be classified into two distinct categories as follows. EBE Type 1. These entities are humanoid and might be mistaken for human beings of the Oriental race if seen from a distance. They are bipedal, 5 to 5 foot 4 inches in height, and weigh 80 to 100 pounds. They're just little fellas. They're just little fellas, really. Proportionally, they are similar to humans, although the cranium is somewhat larger and more rounded. The skin is a pale, chalky yellow in color, thick and slightly pebbled in appearance. Slightly pebbled. The eyes are small, wide-set, almond-shaped, with brownish-black irises, with very large pupils. The whites of the eyes are not like that of humans, but have a pale gray cast. The ears are small and set low on the skull. The nose is thin and long, and the mouth is wider than in humans and nearly lipless. There is no apparent facial hair and very little body hair, that being very fine and confined to the underarm and groin area. The body is thin and without apparent body fat, but the muscles are well developed. Oh, they're slightly jacked. The hands are small with 4 long digits, but no opposable thumb. The outside digit is jointed in a manner as to be nearly opposable, and there is no webbing between the fingers as in humans. The legs are slightly, but noticeably bowed, and the feet are somewhat splayed and proportionally large. That is one of the strangest descriptions. EBE Type 2. And by the way, Type 1 seems to be the EBEs that were discovered at Aztec. If you look at William Steinman's book, UFO Crash at Aztec, it talks about 16 bodies, I believe, that were found within this 100-foot craft. The craft was intact. The bodies were referred to as small children, which is also what Bob Lazar referred to them as at S4. They called them the kids because they didn't look like the typical grays. They looked like small humanoid, but have like larger heads and were smaller, but had like tiny facial features, like human-like. And in Aztec, it was even said that they had perfect teeth. EBE type 2. These entities are humanoid, but differ from type 1 in many respects. They are bipedal, 3 feet 5 inches to 4 foot 2 inches in height, and weigh about 25 to 50 pounds. Oh, you could just throw them. Proportionally, the head is much larger than humans, or type 1 EBEs, the cranium being much larger and elongated. The eyes are very large, slanted, and nearly wrap around the side of the skull. They are black with no whites showing. There is no noticeable brow ridge, and the skull has a slight peak that runs over the crown. The nose consists of 2 small slits, which sit high above the mouth, the slit-like mouth. There are no external ears. The skin is a pale bluish-gray color, being somewhat darker on the back of the creature, and is very smooth and fine-celled. There is no hair on either the face or the body, and these creatures do not appear to be mammalian. The arms are long in proportion to the legs, and the hands have 3 long tapering fingers, and a thumb which is nearly as long as the fingers. The second finger is thicker than the others, but not as long as the index finger. The feet are small and narrow, and the 4 toes are jointed together with a membrane. It is not definitely known where either type of creature originated, but it seems certain that they did not evolve on Earth. It is further evident, although not certain, that they may have originated on 2 different planets. So it seems like type 1 definitely is more of a humanoid type alien that couldn't necessarily pass for a real human, but maybe a closer cousin to Homo sapiens. And type 2 seems to be your typical sort of skinny Bob. 50 pounds. Also tridactyl. I thought 4 fingers. No, they say 3. Very interesting. Tridactyl gray beings. Are these the same beings that are present in Peru? Time will tell. All right, moving on. The description of the ET technology. This is super interesting. Now we're talking about, what are we talking about here? Probes? Wands? The following information is from preliminary analysis reports of wreckage collected from crash sites of extraterrestrial craft, 1947 to 1953. Pause. 1953, we're talking about the Kingman, Arizona crash. That might be the reference here. Excerpts from which are quoted verbatim to provide guidance as to the type of characteristics of material that might be encountered in future recovery operations. A. Initial analysis of the debris from the crash site seems to indicate that the debris is that of extraterrestrial craft, which exploded from within and came into contact with the ground with great force, completely destroying the craft. The volume of the matter indicates that the craft was approximately the size of a medium aircraft, although the weight of the debris indicates that the craft was extremely light for its size. B. Metallurgical analysis of the bulk of the debris recovered indicates that the samples are not composed of any material currently known to terrestrial science. C. The material tested possesses great strength and resistance to heat in proportion to its weight and size, being stronger by far than any materials used in military or civilian aircraft at present. That's an interesting point because the 4chan whistleblower also said that these things were extremely heat resistant, which made it nearly impossible to work with. D. Much of the material having the appearance of aluminum foil or aluminum magnesium sheeting displays none of the characteristics of either metal, resembling instead some kind of unknown plastic-like material. E. Solid structures and substantial beams having a distinct similarity in appearance to very dense grain-free wood. Was very light in weight and possesses tensile and compression strength not obtainable by any means known to modern industry. Whoa. F. None of the material tested displayed measurable magnetic characteristics or residual radiation. No radiation, not magnetic. G. Several samples were engraved or embossed with marks and patterns. These patterns were not readily identifiable, and attempts to decipher their meaning has been largely unsuccessful. H. Examination of several apparent mechanical devices, gears, etc., revealed little or nothing of their function or methods of manufacture. This is really interesting stuff. The grain-free wood is a really interesting way to describe something. You know, if you were to think grain-free wood or some type of plastic, even Bob Lazar said that the craft that he worked on, he wasn't convinced was metallic. It felt cold to the touch, but that doesn't mean it was metal. You know, maybe some type of stone or lightweight granite or something. All these descriptions of these materials seem a little foreign, and we hear about the material that you bend and it goes back to what it originally was. You know, back then we also didn't have carbon fiber We didn't have any of this advanced sort of metallic alloys that we have today. So maybe today, with a keener eye and more sufficiently advanced tech, we'd be able to properly, determine what this stuff is. Or at least the contractors, Raytheon and Lockheed and all the above, probably already know this. Next up, we got the press blackout, number 12. This is chapter 3 in recovery operations. So what they go through when they recover one of these crashed UFOBs. Great care must be taken to preserve the security of any location where extraterrestrial technology might be retrievable for scientific study. Extreme measures must be taken to protect and preserve any material or craft from discovery, examination, or removal by civilian agencies or individuals of the general public. It is therefore recommended that a total press blackout be initiated whenever possible. If this course of action should not prove feasible, the following cover stories are suggested for release to the press. The officer in charge will act quickly to select the cover story that best fits the situation. It should be remembered when selecting a cover story that official policy regarding UFOBs is that they do not exist. A. Official denial. Whoa, this is really interesting. I'm having a flashback to a discussion I had with Lou Elizondo on the podcast when we had Lou back in January. Lou said something really interesting there. He said,
there's a saying we have, first of all, you deny everything, you admit nothing, and then you make counter-accusations.
Well, interesting. A. Official denial. The most desirable response would be that nothing unusual has occurred. By stating that the government has no knowledge of the event, further investigation by the public press may be forestalled. B. Discredit witnesses. If at all possible, witnesses will be held incommunicado until the extent of their knowledge and involvement can be determined. Witnesses will be discouraged from talking about what they have seen, and intimidation may be necessary to ensure their cooperation. If witnesses have already contacted the press, it will be necessary to discredit their stories. This can best be done by the assertion that they have either misinterpreted natural events, are the victims of hysteria or hallucinations, or are the perpetrators of hoaxes. All of the above we've heard of, by the way, especially the hoax part when you look into things like not only the Gulf Breeze situation in Florida, but Aztec. Probably the most monumental and well-covered crash retrieval incident in the history of the United States was dismissed as a hoax immediately before the press got a hold of it by the FBI. And when looking into it, you realize there's a lot more to it. I'm leaving you guys breadcrumbs, by the way. C. Deceptive statements. It may become necessary to issue false statements to preserve the security of the site. Meteors, downed satellites, weather balloons, and military aircraft are all acceptable alternatives, although, in the case of the downed military aircraft statement, care should be exercised not to suggest that the aircraft might be experimental or secret, as this might arouse more curiosity of both the American and foreign press. Statements issued concerning contamination of the area due to toxic spills from trucks or railroad tankers can also serve to keep unauthorized or undesirable personnel away from the area. Sneaky. Super sneaky. 13. Secure the area. The area must be secured as rapidly as possible to keep authorized personnel from infiltrating the site. The officer in charge will set up a perimeter and establish a command post inside the perimeter. Personnel allowed on the site will be kept to the absolute minimum necessary to prepare the craft or debris for transport and will consist of military security forces. Local authorities may be pressed into service on traffic and crowd control. Under no circumstances will local official or law enforcement personnel be allowed inside the perimeter, and all necessary precautions should be taken to ensure that they do not interfere with the operation. Now that's interesting because also, I go back to the Aztec crash because it's something that I'm looking into right now, but local law enforcement apparently was at the site. This is 1948, 8 months after Roswell. Things were still a little dicey on the recovery side, I'm guessing. And so, they doubled down on their security tactics, apparently. So a perimeter. It is desirable that sufficient military personnel be utilized to set up a perimeter around the site large enough to keep both unauthorized personnel and the perimeter personnel from seeing the site. We've had incidences in 1947, according to, Philip Corso. Apparently, the perimeters weren't well established, and people were just kind of onlookers were kind of seeing, this thing happen in real time. Once the site is contained, regular patrols will be set up along the perimeter to ensure complete security, and electronic surveillance will be utilized to augment the patrols. Perimeter personnel will be equipped with hand communication and automatic weapons with live ammunition. Personnel working at the site will carry sidearms. No unauthorized personnel will be allowed into the secure area. B. Command post. Ideally, the command post should be as close to the site as is practical to efficiently coordinate operations. As soon as the command post is operational, contact with the Majestic 12 group will be established via secure communications. C. Area sweep. The site and surrounding area will be cleared of all unauthorized personnel. Witnesses will be debriefed and detained for further evaluation by MJ-12. Under no circumstances will witnesses be released from custody until their stories have been evaluated by MJ-12 and they have been thoroughly debriefed. D. Situation evaluation. A preliminary evaluation of the situation will be completed and a preliminary report prepared. The MJ-12 group will then be briefed on the situation at the earliest possible opportunity. The MJ-12 group will then make a determination as to whether or not a MJ-12 Red Team or OPNAC team will be dispatched to the area. What is an OPNAC team?
An OPNAC team refers to a group within the Office of the Chief of Naval Operations, OPNAV, that focuses on specific naval operations core functions. The N denotes a particular area of responsibility, such as operations, intelligence, or logistics. The C signifies a specific command or division within that area. These teams are integral to the Navy's organizational structure, ensuring effective management and coordination of various naval operations.
Well, looks like ChatGPT steered me wrong a little bit here. OPNAC is actually rumored to possibly be an acronym said to stand for Operations National Advisory Committee, or variations like Operational National Command. It's not an officially recognized organization, and so in UFO lore, it's sometimes described as like a high-level military or intelligence unit involved in crash retrievals, extraterrestrial contact, or special access programs, or SAPs. So if I make reference mistakenly to naval intelligence, well, forgive me. But that doesn't mean the Navy isn't involved. Once again, folks, the Navy inserts itself into the crash retrieval narrative quite deeply. As mentioned again by John Ramirez, former CIA officer, he says the highest, most top secret program, which he was refused to be read into, had to do with underwater recovery. Let's go into Section 2, the technology recovery, removal and transport. And this includes entities as well. As soon as a communication is established, removal and transport of all material will commence under order from MJ-12. A. Documentation. If the situation permits, care should be taken to document the area with photographs before anything is moved. The area will be checked for radiation and other toxic agents. If the area cannot be kept secure for an extended period of time, all material must be packed and transported as quickly as possible to the nearest secure military facility. This will be accomplished by covered transport using little-traveled roads wherever possible. B. Complete or functional craft. Craft are to be approached with extreme caution if they appear functional, as serious injury may result from exposure to radiation and electrical discharges. If the craft is functioning but appears to be abandoned, it may be approached only by specially trained MJ-12 Red Team personnel wearing protective clothing. Any device that seems to be functioning should also be left to MJ-12 Red Team disposal. Complete craft and parts of craft too large to be transported by covered transport will be disassembled, if this can be accomplished easily and quickly. If they must be transported whole, or on open flatbed trailers, they will be covered in such a manner as to camouflage their shape. Whoa. So they're actively camouflaging their shape during transport. That's interesting. Because obviously seeing a saucer on a flatbed, kind of gives it away. Wow. Maybe now is a good time to remind you that our Majestic 12 MJ-12 merch line is now available. Collection comes complete with hats. C, now we go on to extraterrestrial and biological entities. EBEs must be removed to a top-secret facility as quickly as possible. Great care should be taken to prevent possible contamination by alien biological agents. Dead EBEs should be packed in ice at the earliest opportunity to preserve tissues. Should live EBEs be encountered, they should be taken into custody and removed to a top-secret facility by ambulance. Every effort should be taken to ensure the EBE's survival. Personnel involvement with EBEs, alive or dead, must be kept to an absolute minimum. See Chapter 5 for more detailed information dealing with EBEs. We'll get to Chapter 5 in a second. That is crazy. Imagine you're an ambulance driver. If there's an ambulance driver out there who remembers driving around the EBE, please reach out to us. Cleansing the area. Once all material has been removed from the central area, the immediate area will be thoroughly inspected to make sure that all traces of extraterrestrial technology have been removed. In the case of a crash, the surrounding area will be thoroughly gone over several times to ensure that nothing has been overlooked. The search area involved may vary according to local conditions, at the discretion of the officer in charge. When the officer in charge is satisfied that no further evidence of the event remains at the site, it may be evacuated. Also, something in Diana Pasulka's book, which was interesting, they talked about her being brought to this crash site in New Mexico by who we now know as Tim Taylor, this person, that worked somehow in the government. But at this very crash site, there seemed to be a ton of just like debris, aluminum debris from like tin cans and stuff. And it was explained to her that that's actually how they cover up a lot of this stuff. So instead of finding all the little parts, it's much easier to cover it up with a bunch of junk, and then people metal detecting, just, you're never going to find anything. So 16, special or unusual conditions. The possibility exists that extraterrestrial craft may land or crash in heavily populated areas where security cannot be maintained, or where large segments of the population and the public press may witness these events. Contingency Plan MJ 1949-04P/78, top secret eyes only, should be held in readiness should the need to make a public disclosure become necessary. Now that was referenced in the original briefing documents that we read through, if you want to check that out. Okay, here, this is interesting because these are basically items, the description and condition of the items, the code, and then the receiving facility. Now, if we look at aircraft, intact or operational, S4. Intact devices, like electronic devices or machines, S4. Damaged device, S4. Power plant, so devices and machines and fragments which are possible propulsion units, fuels and etc., S4. Identified and unidentified fragments, S4. However, non-mechanical, non-electronic materials of a support nature, such as clothing, personal belongings, or organic ingestibles, went to the Blue Lab WP61. What is that? They're saying here that Blue Lab, blue means like the being. Like Blue Lab is also slang for like the lab handling blue, or the non-human intelligence. So the living non-humans would go to the Department of Naval Intelligence at some level, and then the deceased ones would go to Blue Lab. My guess would be Battelle. That's where the EBO scientists said that's where he had worked, or where the bodies were being kept, the dead ones. And then the living ones would be operations of naval intelligence at some point. And then media would go to Building 2 at KB88, and then any device, any weapon would go to S4 as well. So S4 being the major facility there. Here they just show basically packing slips for if you're shipping this stuff and what that should look like. The box closure is sealed with a gummed craft tape. Here's the craft tape that they were referring to initially. MJ Form 1-007 is placed in a sealed manila envelope marked Magic 12 Access Only. It then shows here a diagram. There's a picture here of the original picture of the diagram of like what the boxes will look like, how to handle those, how to take them out. All very serious stuff. Pretty standard, I guess, when dealing with sensitive materials. Here we go. Section 1, Living Organisms. The EBEs, baby. Scope. This section deals with the encounters with living extraterrestrial biological entities, or EBEs. Such encounters fall under the jurisdiction of MJ12 OPNAC BBS-01 and will be dealt with by this special unit only. This section details the responsibilities of persons or units making the initial contact. Whoa. This is something I got to learn if we're having one of these little gray fellas on this podcast one day. Encounters. Encounters with EBEs may be classified according to one of the following categories. Encounters A, encounters initiated by EBEs. Possible contact may take place as a result of overtures by the entities themselves. In these instances, it is anticipated that encounters will take place at military installations or other obscure locations selected by mutual agreement. Such meetings would have the advantage of being limited to personnel with appropriate clearance away from public scrutiny. Although it is not considered very probable, there also exists the possibility that EBEs may land in public places without prior notice. In this case, OPNAC team will formulate cover stories for the press and prepare briefings for the president and chiefs of staff. So here they're just basically telling us that they're already communicating with these EBEs and that they already have a deal with them, which corroborates what was said by Dan Burrish or Dan Crane about the initial contact with the J-Rod, that there was some type of deal or exchange program happening. And it also corroborates this idea that in I think it was 54, maybe 56, this idea of the Greada Treaty made by Eisenhower, where he met with the aliens, but then also the meeting in, I think, 1965 at the Holloman Air Force Field, the landing there, another meeting occurred with taller entities. I don't know. Very interesting. B, encounters as a result of downed craft. Contact with survivors of accidents or craft downed by natural events or military action may occur with little or no warning. In these cases, it is important that the initial contact be limited to personnel to preserve security. Civilian witnesses to the area will be detained and debriefed by MJ-12. Contact with EBEs by military personnel not having MJ-12 or OPNAC clearances is to be strictly limited to action necessary to ensure the availability of the EBEs for study by the OPNAC team. Now, remember, OPNAC is the ones that deal with them when they're alive. 24, isolation and custody. Okay, a little custody battle for these little guys. EBE will be detained by whatever means are necessary and removed to a secure location as soon as possible. Precautions will be taken by personnel coming in contact with EBEs to minimize the risk of disease as a result of contamination by unknown organisms. If the entities are wearing spacesuits or breathing apparatus of some kind, care should be exercised to prevent damage to these devices. While all efforts should be taken to assure the well-being of the EBEs, they must be isolated from any contact with unauthorized personnel. While it is not clear what provisions or amenities might be required by non-human entities, they should be provided if possible. The officer in charge of the operation will make these determinations as no guidelines now exist to cover this area. And I'm sure they've since come up with a lot of these guidelines, following the 1996 crash and visitation of these tiny little aliens in this town of Varginha, Brazil, where people who came in contact, namely one person who came in contact with one of these beings, ended up dying from what was written on his autopsy, general infection, due to contact. So as much as I'd love to have one of these little guys on the podcast, I'll be wearing a spacesuit for sure. Or it will. One of us will. Both of us might. Severe precautions will be taken in order to assure both of our survival. B, injured or wounded entities will be treated by a medical personnel assigned to the OPNAC team. If the team medical personnel are not immediately available, first aid will be administered by medical corps personnel at the initial site. Since little is known about EBE's biological functions, aid will be confined to the stopping of bleeding, bandaging of wounds, and splinting of broken limbs. No medications of any kind are to be administered, as the effect of terrestrial medications on non-human biological systems are impossible to predict. As soon as the injuries are considered stabilized, the EBEs will be moved by closed ambulance or other suitable conveyance to a secure location. C, in dealing with any living extraterrestrial biological entity, security is of paramount importance. All other considerations are secondary. Although it is preferable to maintain the physical well-being of any entity, the loss of EBE life is considered acceptable if conditions or delays to preserve that life in any ways compromises the security of operations. Basically saying, making sure everything is under wraps is more important than the lives of these EBEs. That's how important this program is to these folks. By some sheer miracle, this beautiful little life that comes from another star system and another species entirely makes its way here to communicate with us. It is more important for us that no one finds out about it than that the life of this EBE continues to exist. Sad times indeed. I would not like to be the one making that call. D, once the OPNAC team has taken custody of the EBEs, their care and transportation to designated facilities become the responsibility of OPNAC personnel. Every cooperation will be extended to the team in carrying out duties. OPNAC team personnel will be given top priority at all times, regardless of their apparent rank or status. No person has the authority to interfere with the OPNAC team in the performance of its duties by special direction of the President of the United States. Whoa. So even the lowest level OPNAC security personnel supersedes absolutely any government entity in existence. Now we're going to go into non-living organisms, all right? So the scope, ideally retrieval for scientific study of cadavers and other biological remains, will be carried out by medical personnel familiar with this type of procedure. Familiar? Huh. Probably talking about either Vannevar Bush or Dr. Bronk, is it? These are the guys that apparently, were dealing with the deceased EBEs. Because of security considerations, such collections may need to be done by non-medical personnel. The section will provide guidance for retrieval, preservation, and removal of cadavers and remains in the field. Ooh, dark. Retrieval and preservation. A, the degree of decomposition of organic remains will vary depending on the length of time the remains have been lying in the open, unprotected, and may be accelerated by both local weather conditions and action by predators. Gross. Therefore, biological specimens will be removed from the crash site as quickly as possible to preserve the remains in as good a condition as possible. A photographic record will be made of all remains before they are removed from the site. Again, the gross sort of thought comes to mind of like some coyote just like having dinner in the desert unexpectedly, being like, ooh, a snack. B, personnel involved with this type of operation will take all reasonable precautions to minimize physical contact with the cadavers or remains being retrieved. Surgical gloves should be worn, or if they are not available, wool or leather gloves may be worn, provided they are collected for decontamination immediately after use. Shovels and entrenching tools may be employed to handle remains, provided caution is exercised to be certain no damage is done to the remains. Remains will be touched with bare hands only if no other means of moving them can be found. All personnel and equipment involved in recovery operations will undergo decontamination procedures immediately after those operations have been completed. Wonder if they talk about the smell as well. Remains will be preserved against further decomposition as equipment and conditions permit. Cadavers and remains will be bagged or securely wrapped in waterproof coverings. Tarpaulins or foul weather gear may be used for this purpose if necessary. Remains will be refrigerated or packed with ice if available. All remains will be tagged or labeled and the time and date recorded. Wrapped remains will be placed on stretchers or in sealed containers for immediate removal.
Gonna grab a snack real quick. Be right back.
To a secure facility. Small detached pieces and material scraped from solid surfaces will be put in jars and other small capped containers if available. Containers will be clearly marked as to their contents and the time and date recorded. Containers will be refrigerated or packed with ice as soon as possible and removed to a secure facility. So we know that there are photos then, right? That's what they keep saying with the down craft, with the EBEs. Photographs are suggested to be taken, right? So Danny Sheehan had mentioned in one of our podcasts that he was made aware of a photo at Project Blue Book that looked like this, that was taken when the crashed UFO was like in a hill, and there were people photographing it. There was like people holding like those real cameras and filming it. So that checks out to what Danny Sheehan was saying about it, which is pretty cool. Bit of a piece of anecdotal corroborative evidence, if you will, but hey, it's what we got to work with, you know? Here we got an image of different crafts, which is really interesting. Interesting that some of them do show seams, though, when they said no seams. Chapter 6, Guide to UFO Identification. The UFOB Guide, Follow-Up Investigations. A UFOB report is worthy of follow-up investigation when it contains information to suggest that positive identification with a well-known phenomenon may be made or when it characterizes an unusual phenomenon. The report suggests almost immediately, largely by the coherency and clarity of the data, that there is something of identification and or scientific value. In general, reports which should be given consideration are those that involve several reliable observers, together or separately, and which concern sightings of greater duration than 1/4 minute. Exception should be made to this when circumstances attending the report are considered to be extraordinary. Special attention should be given to reports which give promise to a fix on the position and those reports involving unusual trajectories. You know, it is interesting that, like, even if you are skeptically inclined, you have to imagine that the Air Force or whoever is receiving phone calls from because rest assured, people do receive phone calls. You know, whether or not the events are happening, people are calling and saying that there are events happening, whether it's misidentification or whatever it is, right? So these people call in. Well, there has to be some type of structure for screening these calls, and they would be foolish based on multiple, data points of eyewitnesses to dismiss anything, right? So there has to be. So this would make sense that they have some type of protocol. If you're out there doubting any of this is real, you would be hard pressed to think that they don't have some type of protocol for screening, possible foreign adversarial aerial phenomena. They need to know. So, yeah. So the duration of the sighting, less than 15 seconds. That is really interesting. Okay. Each UFO case should be judged individually, but there are a number of rules of thumb under each of the following headings, which should prove helpful in determining the necessity for following up an investigation. Okay, so if you're out there, folks, and you're wanting to, call the Air Force or MJ-12 or whatever it may be with your concerns about a sighting, make sure you take these rules of thumb into consideration. A, the duration of sighting. So the duration of sighting, when it's less than 15 seconds, the probabilities are great that it is not worthy of a follow-up. As a word of caution, however, should a large number of individual observers concur on an unusual sighting of a few second durations, it should not be dismissed. B, the number of persons reporting the sighting. Short duration sightings by single individuals are seldom worthy of follow-up. 2 or 3 competent independent observations carry the weight of 10 or more simultaneous individual observations. As an example, 25 people at one spot may observe a strange light in the sky. This, however, has less weight than 2 reliable people observing the same light from different locations. In the latter case, a position fix is indicated. Ooh, interesting. C, distance from location of sightings to nearest field unit. Reports which meet the preliminary criterion stated above should all be investigated if their occurrence is in the immediate operating vicinity of the squadron concerned. For reports involving greater distances, follow-up necessity might be judged as being inversely proportional to the square of the distances concerned. For example, an occurrence of 150 miles away might be considered to have 4 times the importance, other things being equal, than one that is 300 miles away. That's also interesting. So things that are in direct vicinity of military, let's say, hold a higher importance just because of location. D, reliability of person or persons reporting. In establishing the necessity of follow-up investigation, only short-term reliability of individuals can be employed. Short-term reliability is judged from the logic and coherency of the original report by the age and occupation of the person. Particular attention should be given to whether the occupation involves observation, reporting, or technical knowledge. Right, so a young, vital pilot might be someone they pay more attention to or give more importance to than an old YouTuber like myself, let's say. E, number of individual sightings reported. 2 completely individual sightings, especially when separated by a mile or more, constitutes sufficient cause for follow-up, assuming previous criterion have not been violated. F, the value of obtaining additional information immediately. If the information cannot be obtained within 7 days, the value of such information is greatly decreased. It is of great value to obtain additional information immediately if previously stated criteria have been met. Often, if gathered quickly, weather conditions, angular speed, changes in direction, duration, are sufficient for immediate evaluation. If investigation is undertaken after weeks or months, the original observers cease to be of value as far as additional new information is concerned. Fair. Generally, late interrogation yields only bare repetition of facts originally reported, plus an inability on the part of the observer to be objective. I agree with that. I think the further, just like a magic trick, and I talk about this on several podcasts that I've been on, but when describing seeing or observing anomalous phenomena, it is akin to someone describing what a magic trick was, in that your perspective is a little bit skewed because of, you know, the impossibility, the nature of the impossibility of the occurrence. But also, immediately after an event takes place, a few things happen to you psychologically, which inhibit, you know, proper reporting. And one of those being, you don't want to seem foolish, so you will make the conditions a little bit more impossible. And two, a lot of times you want to make the person feel as though they were there when explaining to them. So you're not trying to give them data, you're trying to convey an emotion. And when you do that, you pad on things a little bit. You'll round off the edges and erode the information a little bit so that it appears more digestible and more awe-inspiring or wondrous. So that will happen. So I understand that. Existence of physical evidence, photographs, material, hardware. In cases where any physical evidence exists, follow-up should be made, even if some of the above criterion have not been met. Right. So if you're reporting a sighting, if you say, hey, I have a piece of something, rest assured you're going to get a knock on the door. And conclusion. It is understood that all the above criteria must be evaluated in terms of common sense. The original report, from its working and clarity, will almost always suggest to the reader whether there is any pay dirt in the report. Identification criteria. When a UFO report meets in large measure the criteria projected in Section 1 and a follow-up investigation is instituted, then the interrogator should ask what physical object or objects might have served as the original stimulus for the report. The word object here includes optical phenomena such as reflections from clouds, sundogs, etc. Frequently, one or perhaps two solutions will be immediately suggested by the nature of the report. The word solution cannot be used here in the scientific sense. A solution in UFOB work means that a hypothesis has been arrived at which appears to have the greatest probability of having given rise to the given report. Following is a group of hypotheses or examples which should prove helpful in arriving at solutions. A check should be made to see how many of the items are satisfied by the report and how many are missing. An effort should be made to obtain any missing items as soon as possible. Each typical hypothesis is listed in a separate paragraph. So a lot of these things are going to be reported, right? I remember, I think it was November or December, a lot of people had posted videos of the planet, I think it was Venus. And Venus in the wintertime before the sun sets is completely visible in the sky and brighter than any other star. And it just kind of sits there. And so a lot of UFO reports tend to increase during that time. Not to say that UFOs don't exist. We're just saying that people will report prosaic events as well as, you know, UFOBs. So something they have to be aware of. So they talk about aircrafts, balloons, meteors, stars or planets, and optical phenomena, including lights and sundogs and whatnot. So I'm not going to go through all of that. That seems like an apartment for
Sundog.
Menzel to take care of. But yeah, essentially just looking at natural phenomenon and things that, you know, you would assume are up there. Another one of which that won't be included in there now today, which makes things, you know, exponentially more complicated, satellites and drones and experimental aircraft as well. But yeah, that's something that we have to be on the look for as well. So folks, that's about it for the read through here. In my opinion, a very thorough manual of operations. Everything from what to do with the reported sightings, what to do with the crash, how do you lock down things, how do you create a media blackout, how do you interrogate and debrief people, where do you send the wreckage, the bodies, the tech, the live beings, who to contact, how to package it, crate it, ship it nationally, internationally, and just basically how to cover it up, how to keep it secret. MJ-12, to this day, continues to be a part of the UFO zeitgeist and lore. It includes everyone from Bob Lazar to Dan Burrish or Crane to Richard Doty to all sorts of other people involved, and the campaigns of disinformation run rampant within this area. So definitely proceed with caution when consuming this content, but keep an open mind as well. I personally, my conviction, very, very high that MJ-12, or at least the Majestic program, exists. And most of that comes from, you know, confirmation from Bob Lazar, who I hold, I think, in highest conviction of all people who have stepped forward. Crucify me for that if you like. But I've spoken to Bob, you know, on several occasions, and it is clear to me, at least, that that he was involved in one of these projects and that the MAJ stuff is real. So that is my personal conviction level on the matter. And I don't say that lightly, I'll tell you that. Folks, let me know what you think of the Majestic 12 group. If you haven't already checked out the previous video I made on these gatekeepers of aliens, go check it out. I'll leave the link in the description. Yeah, I worked hard on that video too. And by all means, if you want to check out area52.shop and shop your very own piece of MJ12 merch, by all means do so. It is there. We will not be reprinting anything. This is like as soon as it's out there, it's gone, and we're going to move on. But this collection, we stock the shelves quite a bit, so have at it. Join the Discord. Check out the...
What I wrote about, and that was my limit, unfortunately, that it was given. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I would like to recognize Mr. Timmons for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Elizondo, you just said something interesting. You said they don't seem to be hiding. They don't seem to be hiding. The UAP sightings are becoming increasingly brash, if you will. And, we've been hearing about these for years, but they've generally been isolated and not as consistent and over-critical military installations. Would you say that's fair? Is this becoming increasingly often? Is it happening more and more?
Great question, sir. Let me see if I can answer this for you. Certainly there seems to be some indication that they're being provocative, meaning that they're, in some cases, literally splitting aircraft formations right down the middle. So that's an air safety issue. The question is it the frequency increasing?
Okay.
And really the response is it depends.
I want to play some
Yes, it's
over.
possible that there is an increase in frequency, but it's also possible that there's heightened awareness now, and there's also more pervasiveness of technology out there that can record this information. So we're not quite sure yet if it's actually an increase in numbers of these events, or is it that we have better equipment now that to record these things, and we have a better ability, if you will, to analyze these things.
And that's my next question. It seems...
Okay then, Helldivers, we are back. We have got a lot to go over today. The major order is venturing through, and our minor order is actually doing Helldivers 2, as we didn't actually have one this week. People are getting really intrigued as to what it is that's happening because, well, performance and quality control is definitely something that they need to be focusing on at the moment. Somebody asked if we'll get a patch next week instead, and the Baskonator stated that they don't have anything to share yet, but they are currently working on the next one. So with the fact of them working on the next one, hopefully we'll receive something on Tuesday. It's always good to know that they're definitely hard at work, but fingers crossed something good comes through. As due to Shams Georgiani's comments over the last week or so, a lot of people have been worried about the AR Coyote being the main target of nerfing happening very soon.
I would love to be able to play Helldivers. What? We need the patch.
I'm driving to my apartment from my girlfriend's parents' house. Me and my girlfriend are on our way home. She starts screaming. Next thing I know, I'm looking at a bright orange thing punching its way into the atmosphere. I say to myself in my head, that's got to be a meteor. It aero brakes to a stop 1,000 meters above my head. At which point, I freaked the fuck out. This thing is stationary, it's orange, it's glowing, it's on fire, it's transparent. The next thing it does is rocket off at an 90-degree angle. When I say 90 degrees, I mean like dead square. This scared the freaking hell out of me. Anyway, that's my experience. Have a good day.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Chris Ramsey, and welcome back to another episode of Debriefed. Today is yet another beginning of a document read-through. This document, however, is fascinating. I'm completely enamored by this story. Is it true? Is it not true? Who knows? Maybe we'll find out, but we are guaranteed to have a good time reading through it. So before we get started, folks, leave a like, subscribe, hit the notification bell if you like videos like these document read-throughs, and especially these alien interactions. This is something I'm fascinated by, I think even more so than the UFO topic. You know, always feels good to have great guests in the skiff and learn from these amazingly, talented individuals and individuals with interesting backgrounds and stories and history. But every now and then, I gotta tell you, there is nothing I enjoy more than sitting here with some questionable documents, a cup of joe, and you guys. Also, hats are back in stock. I know a lot of you have been asking about the black snapbacks and the trucker hats. Those are back in stock. We're trying to read. This transcript is an excerpt from a book published by Lawrence R. Spencer, who has sadly passed a few years ago. So I would highly, highly encourage all of those watching, if you want to get the full story, as I will not be reading the entire book, please head over to the website. I've linked it below. Purchase it for yourself to support, his estate or his family, and have a look for yourself, and so you don't miss any of the details. So in the first chapter, Lawrence recounts his contact with Miss McElroy, a woman who claimed to have ties to the 1947 Roswell incident in New Mexico. She said she refused to discuss it because her life depended on it, and once in 1988, Lawrence was able to allegedly speak to this lady on the phone. This is when she lived in Glasgow, Montana. He later received a handwritten letter from her in Ireland referencing his book. But when he tried to contact her at the return address, the homeowner informed him that Mrs. McElroy and her husband had recently deceased and were buried locally. However, despite this, he could not find any official records of her existence under any name. So did she give a pseudonym to, the landlord and to Lawrence Spencer? Quite possible. But it does lead us to suspect that either this is made up or the government simply, erased her identity as part of the cover-up. Your guess is as good as mine, but that is where we begin. August 12th in 2007, this is the letter from Mrs. McElroy. Dear Lawrence, I am typing this letter to you on my old Underwood typewriter that I bought after I was discharged from the Army. Somehow, it seems like a fitting contrast to the subject of this letter and the documents you will find enclosed in the envelope. The last time I spoke to you was about 8 years ago. During your brief telephone interview with me, you asked me to assist you with the research of the Oz Factors book you were writing because you suspected that I might know something that would help your investigation into the possibility that extraterrestrial beings may have influenced the history of Earth. When we spoke, I told you that I did not have any information that I could share with you about anything. Okay, pause. Important to note that the author, Lawrence R. Spencer, is indeed also a fictional author who writes about aliens. Okay. Know a lot of you, this is where you check out. This is where you go, well, that sums it up. This guy writes books about aliens, and all of a sudden he gets some lady who says she spoke to an alien and he has the transcripts and no one else does. Seems suspicious? Absolutely. And I concur. It is suspicious. It's not going to stop me from listening because let's say that what he's saying is true, then I think that this is very important. I think that the level of importance currently outweighs the possibility that this isn't legitimate. So we must continue for our research to read on. Also, this isn't new. Whitley Strieber as well has written many science fiction or fictional books, but is also, as you know, allegedly been abducted by aliens. Also, Nick Pope, who worked for the Ministry of Defense in the UK at the UFO desk, nearly 21 years at the ministry, also wrote science fiction books. So is there a pattern that leads these people to the phenomenon, or are all these people just simply trying to make a bag? That's really up to you to decide. And then I'm sure they've dealt with those criticisms as well. But again, we carry on. Since then, I've read your book and found it very interesting and compelling. Now, I'm not going to read the entire letter of Miss McElroy because I don't think it's pertinent. And I think, again, if you want to read the entire letter, you can go ahead and buy the book. I'm going to give you a few footnotes here that are rather pertinent, and then we're going to get into the interaction with the being. So essentially, she reconsidered her position about not coming forward and not giving him any details or helping him out with, his book. And now she's like, well, maybe I will tell you actually what went on. She goes on saying that many men have been killed to extinguish the possibility of revealing the knowledge that she has helped to withhold from society. But at this point, she's 83 years old, and she says here, I've decided to leave this body, which has outlasted its usefulness to me, using a painless method of self-administered euthanasia. I have very few months to live and nothing to fear or lose. And she goes on talking about fairy mounds and hills of Terra and the Great Mound, like the pyramids. And all of this actually ends up relating back to her relationship with the extraterrestrial and the information that was provided to her. So very fascinating stuff. But here's the reason why she comes forward with this. She says, the crystal clear perspective of hindsight has revealed a higher purpose to me, assisting the survival of the planet, all living beings, and life forms in our galaxy. The status quo of our government establishment has been to protect the people from knowledge of such matters. In fact, the only protection afforded by ignorance and secrecy is to hide the private agenda of those in power to enslave others, and, by doing so, to disarm every perceived enemy and ally through superstition and stupidity. Them's fighting words, Matilda. Matilda's had enough. Now, I'm entrusting these documents to your discretion to impart to the world in any form or matter you see fit. My only request is that you do so in a way that will not threaten your own life or well-being, if possible. If you were to incorporate these notes of my experience into a work of fiction, such as a novel, the factual nature of the material could be easily dismissed or discredited by agency for whom national security is used as a personal shield against scrutiny and justice. In so doing, you could disavow any knowledge of their true origin and claim that it is fictitious work of your imagination. Whoever said that truth is stranger than fiction was right as rain. For most people, all of this will be unbelievable. Unfortunately, beliefs are not a reliable criteria for reality. I agree with that. Well said. Just because you believe something does not make it so. All right, let's get to the meat and bones here. As you know, 1947, July, the Roswell Army Airfield issued a press release stating that personnel from the field's 509th Bomb Group had recovered a crashed flying disc from a ranch near Roswell, New Mexico, sparking intense media interest to say the least. Later that same day, the commanding general of the 8th Air Force stated that Major Jesse Marcel, who was involved with the original recovery of the debris, had recovered only tattered remnants of a weather balloon. The true facts of the incident have been suppressed by the United States government since then. Now, we know this to be true because Jesse Marcel also came forward later in his life prior to his death, stating that, there was a cover-up, and the materials that they had were not the weather balloon stuff. And he was told to basically pose with this ridiculous, balsa wood and weather balloon debris.
All I could do is keep my mouth shut. And General Ramey is the one who told the newspapers what it was and to forget about it. It was nothing more than a weather observation balloon. Of course, which we both knew differently.
She goes on to say that she was enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Force, Women's U.S. Army Air Force Medical Corps, which was a part of the U.S. Army back then, and she was assigned to the 509th Bomb Group as a flight nurse at the time of the incident. When the news that there had been a crash was received at the base, I was asked to accompany Mr. Cavett, the counterintelligence officer, to the crash site as the driver of his vehicle, and to render any needed emergency medical assistance to any survivors if necessary. Therefore, I briefly witnessed the wreckage of an alien spacecraft, as well as the remains of several alien personnel aboard the craft who were already dead. When we arrived, I learned that one of the personnel on board of the craft had survived the crash. And this is something that's come up, by the way, in UFO lore, that some people say, oh no, all the bodies were dead, and then other people say, no, there was a single survivor. And this is about that sole survivor. So this being was conscious and apparently uninjured. The conscious alien was similar in appearance, but not the same as the others. None of the other personnel present could communicate with the survivor, as the being did not communicate verbally or by any recognizable signs. However, while I examined the patient for injuries, I immediately detected and understood that the alien being was attempting to communicate with me by mental images or telepathic thought, which projected directly from the mind of the being. I immediately reported this phenomenon to Mr. Cavett, as no other person present could perceive these thoughts, and the alien seemed able and willing to communicate with me. It was decided, after a brief consultation with a senior officer, that I would accompany the surviving alien back to the base. Can you imagine being a nurse? First of all right, there's a wreckage, there's something, whoa, what is that being? Boom, boom, boom. All of a sudden you're getting images in your head, flashes of messages, seeing this body, seeing this being alive, and you're like, what the heck is going on? And imagine Lawrence R. Spencer, the author, reading this note, getting this letter and being like, holy cow. By the way, if anyone's out there who has a similar story, please send it my way. Figure out a way to get in contact with me, maybe through Discord, and I would happily read your letter as well. This was partly due to the fact that I was a nurse and could attend to the physical needs of the alien as well as serve as a non-threatening communicator and companion. So she was designated the companion to the alien. Being a nurse, she could be trusted to tend to the alien should it need any medical attention. She says, my duty was to communicate with and interview the alien and to make a complete report of all that I discovered to command authorities. Subsequently, I was supplied with specific lists of questions provided to me by military and non-military personnel, which I was to interpret for the alien and record the responses to the questions provided. I also accompanied the alien at all times during medical testing and the many other examinations to which the alien was subjected by staff from numerous government agencies. As you can imagine, especially back then, yeah, there would be a lot of testing going on. Poor thing. She says, I was given a promotion in rank to Senior Master Sergeant to improve my security rating and to increase my pay grade from $54 a month to $138 a month. Wow, that's a big increase. For this very unusual assignment, I performed these duties from July 7th through to August 1947, at which time the alien died or departed the body, as you will read about in my notes. Although I was never left entirely alone with the alien, as there were always military personnel, intelligence agency people, and a variety of other officials present from time to time, I did have uninterrupted access to and communication with the alien being for nearly 6 weeks. It's a long time. Hereinafter is an interview and summary of my personal recollections of conversations, in quotes, with the alien craft pilot, whom I came to know by the identity of Errol. A-I-R-L, Errol. I feel that it is my duty at this time, in the best interest of the citizens of Earth, to reveal what I have learned from my interaction with Errol during those 6 weeks. On the anniversary of her death or departure 60 years ago. Wow, her death. Okay, so according to Matilda, this is a female entity. Very interesting. Although I served as a nurse in the Army Air Force, I am not a pilot or technician. Further, I did not have any direct contact with the spacecraft or other materials recovered from the crash site at the time or thereafter. To that degree, it must be taken into consideration that my understanding of the communications I had with Errol are based on my own subjective ability to interpret the meaning of the thoughts and mental images I was able to perceive. Fascinating. Our communications did not consist of spoken language in the conventional sense. Indeed, the body of the alien had no mouth through which to speak. Whoa. That's crazy and creepy. So we're not thinking Skinny Bob here. We're not thinking... there is an image, however. This is interesting. UAP Juan shared this a few days ago on his Twitter account, and these were apparently leaked images of alien beings. So creepy, by the way. All right, so do not look at this if you're easily creeped out, but these things are creepy as F. And you'll notice, and this is one thing I noticed, they do not perceive to have any mouths. And one of them's wearing like some type of cloak. Is this one of the beings that Matilda communicated with? Very interesting. Our communication was by telepathy. At first, I could not understand Errol very clearly. I could perceive images, emotions, and impressions, but it was difficult for me to express these verbally. Once Errol learned the English language, she was able to focus her thoughts more precisely using symbols and meanings of words I could understand. Learning the English language was done as a favor to me. It was more for my own benefit than hers. Whoa, we taught this alien English. Okay. By the end of our interview sessions, and increasingly since then, I've become more comfortable with telepathic communication. I've become more adept at understanding Errol's thoughts as though they are my own. Somehow, her thoughts become my thoughts. Her emotions are my emotions. However, this is limited by her willingness and intention to share her own personal universe with me. She is able to be selective about what communication I am allowed to receive from her. Likewise, her experience, training, education, relationships, and purpose are uniquely her own. Whoa. See, this is a really interesting thought for me because when we think about telepathy or we think about sharing some type of intelligent consciousness, we automatically assume that all thoughts are everybody's and everybody agrees and it's this hive mind sort of collective, when in reality, we do apparently transfer thought, but that doesn't really eliminate uniqueness somehow. Individuality still persists to a certain extent. That's really interesting. This is the symbol of the domain. The domain is a race or civilization of which Errol, the alien I interviewed, is an officer, pilot, and engineer, serving in the domain expeditionary force. The symbol represents the origin and unlimited boundary of the known universe, united and integrated into a vast civilization under the control of the domain. Now, is it literally the domain, or is this just like an interpretation of the word domain? Who knows? Errol is currently stationed at a base in the asteroid belt, which she refers as a space station in the solar system of Earth. First and foremost, Errol is herself. Secondarily, she voluntarily serves as an officer, pilot, and engineer in the domain expeditionary force. In that capacity, she has duties and responsibilities, but she is at leave to come and go as she pleases also. Please accept this material and make it known to as many people as possible. I repeat that this is not my intention to endanger your life with the possession of this material, nor do I really expect you to believe any of it either. However, I do sense that you can appreciate the value that such knowledge may have to those who are willing and able to face the reality of it. Mankind needs to know the answers to questions which are contained in these documents. Who are we? Where do we come from? What is our purpose on Earth? Is mankind alone in the universe? If there is intelligent life elsewhere, why have they not contacted us? It is vital that people understand the devastating consequences to our spiritual and physical survival if we fail to take effective action to undo long-standing and pervasive effects of alien intervention on Earth. Perhaps the information in these documents will serve as a stepping stone to a better future for mankind. I hope that you can be more clever, creative, and courageous in the distribution of this information than I have been. May the gods bless you and keep you. This is Matilda O'Donnell McElroy. I mean, this is truly, truly fascinating. Folks, you know what the requirements are here. Suspend your disbelief. Check it at the door. You know, belief often gets in the way of a good story, and all too many times, especially in the UFO sphere, I will say, we often get carried away by focusing on the wrong things, by denying evidence prior to even absorbing it, based on a worldview that has already been ingrained and cemented in our psyche. To willingly suspend your disbelief in order to absorb information is a skill that I'm sure that you all possess. To deny information and ridicule it outright prior to absorbing the information, this makes you an accomplice to the cover-up. Intaking information does not mean having to believe it. Whether true, whether lies, it is still information. And if you find yourself in the face of new information that seems a little unbelievable, unable to absorb this information due to any pre-existing bias that you may have inherited through the few decades that you've been on this planet, then I highly suggest to practice suspending your disbelief. Keep your conviction low when it comes to this information. Do not believe it outright, but do take it in. Only then will you be able to make connections through this and maybe weed out the possible truth that lies within these documents. There might be one piece of information here that connects to something that you already know, and that might
This is the small town of Aztec, New Mexico, located about 2.5 hours northwest of Albuquerque, depending upon how fast you drive along the often deserted highway. It's close to the Four Corners area, that geographic landmark where the states of Utah, Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico intersect one another. Like most places, it has a story to tell. With Aztec, however, that story goes far beyond the norm. You might even say that the Aztec story is truly out of this world. These days, if you told a friend that you were off to New Mexico to visit the site of an alleged flying saucer crash, that friend would probably assume you were headed to Roswell. For the past 3 decades or so, this has been a pretty safe assumption, as the Roswell incident has become an integral part of American pop culture. But travel back in time to the late 1940s and early 1950s, and your friend would have assumed that you had a different destination in mind. Because long before Roswell became the most famous UFO incident, there was Aztec, the first of the crashed flying saucer stories.
The gist of the Aztec tale is that in 1948, a flying saucer complete with anywhere from 14 to 18 bodies crashed in Aztec, New Mexico, and recovered under cover of high secrecy by the US military. And in various formats and permutations, the tale's been circulated for the last 50 years. Some people consider it to be an outright hoax. Some people are sitting on the fence. Other people consider it to be genuine. Some people consider maybe it's a genuine incident, but it occurred somewhere else.
The timeline of Aztec would be a report from the oil field workers a little after 5 a.m. on March 25th, 1948. Basically, the first report came in as a large brush fire on a mesa off of Hart Canyon Road. As the oil field workers got out there, they discovered a large disc, approximately 100 feet in diameter, sitting on top of a mesa. That had nothing to do with the brush fire, but because of the oil drip tanks out there at that time, people from El Paso Oil Company were notified that they should get out there to investigate the fire and any subsequent danger it could pose. Upon getting out there, they noticed a large disc on the mesa. The military showed up later that day, late lunchtime, early afternoon. The one local law enforcement officer had warned the locals that the military would be there eventually, that they had been notified.
The Aztec is a fascinating case because it was the original, if you will, crash flying saucer story. And it surfaced first in 1949 in columns written by Frank Scully in the Daily Variety. It ultimately led to a best-selling book that Scully wrote, and I think it sold something on the order of 60,000 copies in 1950 in hardcover, and then it went on to 12 editions overseas, and on and on and on. I mean, it was remarkable how successful it was. It's obvious he struck some kind of real chord. It was also total nonsense, and Scully was either one of these fellows who knew enough not to ask questions he didn't want to hear the answers to, or he was genuinely duped by a fellow named Silas Newton and a sidekick of his named Leo Gebauer, who became known as Dr. G in Scully's book.
In Frank Scully's book, Behind the Flying Saucers, that came out in 1950, he tells the Aztec story as told to him by Silas Newton and Leo Gebauer. Silas Newton and Leo Gebauer then introduced Frank Scully to at least 8 scientists that allegedly worked on the Aztec crash. Frank Scully took these 8 people and molded them into one Dr. G. The skeptics like to attack the story if they haven't researched it and say that Dr. G was Leo Gebauer. Leo Gebauer was no more a scientist than anybody. He was an electrical engineer that worked with Silas Newton, more of a glorified electrician more than electrical engineer. Frank Scully in his book plainly states that Dr. G is up to 8 scientists that worked on the recovered UFO at Aztec.
Essentially, these 2 guys were con men who were in the process of trying to peddle a doodle bug, which is an oil and gas industry tag for a device that will find oil and gas, but of course doesn't. And in his case, it was a machine that not only found oil and gas, but gold and water and pretty much anything the Mark was interested in finding. And on top of that, Gebauer had invented something similar, which also supposedly could assess the health of a person. So this was sort of an all-in-one, do-it-all kind of thing. But what they did, which was unusual and made their little bit unique, was that they claimed that their doodle bug was better than anybody else's because it was using technology that had been taken from the flying saucer that allegedly crashed near Aztec. And therefore, obviously, it was far superior. Dr. G, our friend Gebauer, was supposedly a magnetics expert who was one of those called in by the Air Force when the saucer was tracked to ground near Aztec, where it floated to ground, not actually crashed, and presumably disabled by a high-powered radar somewhere nearby. Such was the claim. Anyhow, the whole thing was a total con job. And it was quickly recognized as such and then really exposed in detail in 1952 by J.P. Kahn, who was an investigative reporter. I think he was with the San Francisco Examiner, if I'm not mistaken. And he did a 4 or 5 month investigation in detail, including managing to con the con man out of an example or a sample of the mysterious metal that the saucer was made out of. It turned out to be the sort of stuff that you made pots and pans out of, actually. But, he was a very, very, very sharp reporter who did a really good job. And True Magazine published his article in 1952 exposing these guys. And this led to the district attorney in Denver, Colorado, prosecuting Newton and Gebauer for fraud and various other sorts of associated charges. Anyway, they were convicted in December of 1952. And basically the whole notion of crash flying saucers went away. And people who take flying saucers, UFOs, seriously for decades wouldn't touch anything like that with a 10-foot pole until Roswell came along.
I think where some of the skeptics attack the Aztec story is why would 1, 2, or up to 8 scientists confide with Frank Scully? And that's an important question. But you have to look at who Frank Scully was back then. You have to look at how the media operated back then. We didn't have CNN, we didn't have national network TV. You had a very tight group of journalists, the Dorothy Kilgallons, the Walter Winchells, the Frank Scullys that, quite frankly, were the most credible people of their day in journalism. And that would probably be an automatic person that you would go to break a story like that. The other thing, if you read Frank Scully's writings, the scientists that approached him did not think that was going to be a secret for a long time. They thought that story would break within a year. They were giving Frank Scully a little advance on the Aztec incident.
The first UFO-related documentary I made was a biography of legendary Roswell investigator Stanton T. Friedman. If the Aztec incident has a Friedman, that is to say, someone with respected professional credentials who has chosen to undertake a search for the truth about the UFO phenomenon, it is this man, Scott Ramsey, a successful businessman from North Carolina. Frank Scully might have broken the Aztec story, but it is Ramsey who has rescued the tale from obscurity and who has challenged, after years of research, the long-held view that the whole thing was simply a hoax.
In looking at the story, that was one thing that intrigued me, was looking at the claims made back in 1950 by these 8 scientists. And one was the secret radar bases. So as we started to look into the claims that Dr. G was telling Frank Scully, and we compare to what we know now, when you go back 50-some years later and look at what we've been able to get declassified from the Air Force, the Atomic Energy Commission, somebody back then was definitely in the loop leaking good information to Frank Scully. It took us over, 50 years now of getting records declassified to back up the claims that they were making in 1950. One was the infamous radar bases, the top secret radar bases that were located in New Mexico. We went out searching for them in 1999 using topographic maps on if we were to put a radar base in New Mexico, where would we put it based on height, direction, location. And out of dumb luck, quite frankly, we found the first one near Alvarado, which is about, I guess air miles, probably 40 or 50 miles north of Los Alamos. We went to the Air Force, Maxwell Air Force Base down in Montgomery, Alabama, and asked for the records on these. At the same time, the state of New Mexico was doing a historical research on anything that had anything to do with the Cold War. So this became a perfect fit. We went down to kind of a dual purpose. They released the records, but we had a problem. The Air Force bases radar bases under the Air Force didn't exist till 1950. Well, we couldn't tie that to Aztec because Aztec, of course, was 1948. Looking at the records in great detail, we saw things like the first quarterly report for their capital expenditures. They needed a roof, they needed a water heater, they needed some improvements in electrical work, mainly some transformers. And we asked ourselves a question: if this base was just built, why would they be needing to requisition a water heater, a new roof on a building, and new transformers? So we went back and we did some digging, and turned out that the radar bases were built in 1946, which we have all the historical information on those. The Air Force did acquire the bases from 1950 to 1957, but the Atomic Energy Commission requisitioned the radar bases from 1946 till they turned them over to the Air Force in 1950. There were 3. We had Continental Divide, which is out near Gallup, Alvarado, which is near Chalma, Tia Maria area, and Moriarty, which is due east of Albuquerque. That put up a perfect triangle around Kirkland Air Force Base, Sandia National Labs, and Los Alamos, which was the main purpose of those radar bases, was to protect those Atomic Energy Commission installations.
Ramsey, who has done a tremendous amount of research on Aztec, he found these places. If you look at the history of the Air Defense Command and the setup of the Lash-Up radar system, which was the beginning of our whole Continental Air Defense radar system and all of that, there were no Air Defense Command radars at those sites at the time of the alleged crash saucer incident. But he found out that there were radars there, and they were under the control of the Atomic Energy Commission. They had something to do with some sort of vague, feeble attempt to provide for defense against air attack at Los Alamos, the national lab, the bomb lab. As far as the rest of New Mexico is concerned, there just weren't any such radars. They had them at White Sands. They had radars at White Sands for tracking captured V-2s that they were launching down there and other things of that sort. But these were World War II retreads, essentially. There was nothing exotic.
What kind of people did they have serving here? Because it looks like a short straw kind of gig for me.
Yeah, that's what I thought when I first saw it. I thought, my God, you really had to do something wrong to get here. But boy, you look at the reports, these guys were the cream of the crop. You know, the three bases, they had some pretty impressive resumes, let's put it that way. We looked into the type of radar that they were using at these 3 installations, and especially Alvada had a very, very powerful radar. It was an experimental radar for the U.S. Navy. It was a high microwave, which all radars are. They all work on some form of signal microwave. This one was extremely powerful, and we even have the manuals telling the operators the do's and don'ts if aircraft were in the area. Keeping in mind that was a restricted airspace back in those days. This is the old power generation building. They had 5 diesel generators in here. They would pump the kerosene, the diesel fuel in here through the pump station, the pump house right there. And this was backup. These radar units took a lot of electricity to run. And these were backups. You can see from the slabs here, there were 5. Then all the switch gear and all the cabling that would drop down and go over to the bunker next door.
So that's the bunker over there, is it?
That's the main radar.
Let's go take a look at that.
Sure.
So this is a pretty powerful radar we're talking about.
Oh, yeah. When the Air Force took it over, it became the TIA Amaria. And then later on in life, Alvada.
Huh.
You dare to go in there?
Sure, let's take a look.
You're not afraid of bats, are you?
Well, I don't want to get bitten by one.
Yep, this is it right here. Probably won't want to go back in there.
Probably not.
I guarantee you don't.
And so people speculate that the radar here was powerful enough to interfere somehow with an alien spacecraft.
That's a theory.
And might have brought it down. Mm-hmm. And they would have had similar radar stations, I assume, down by Roswell.
They had one in Corona, and if you read the historical reports we were going through last night, they also had one down at Walker, which was Roswell.
Right. Coincidence?
Yeah, maybe, huh?
If these guys came flying across millions upon millions of miles of space, if they flew from, or billions if they came from another star and a planet around another star, is it likely that they wouldn't be shielded against the kind of feeble radiation that would be coming out of our radar sets? I mean, how likely is it that they would have forgotten about that particular part of the spectrum? And then they get here and they get shot out of the sky.
And people are saying, oh, they're dropping out of the skies. What is all this business? How could a sophisticated craft from far away crash? You know, we had 2 shuttles go, too. Very sophisticated craft. I think they may have run into the unexpected, whether it was a radar beam or all kinds of other things. Accidents happen. That's the way it is. And I think if you look at the mothership descriptions, these huge monster UFOs, if you will, which are seen to have little ones going in and out of them, one big vehicle could carry a whole bunch of these little vehicles. And if they lose one, they lose one. Okay. Explorers, Magellan didn't make it around the planet. His ship made it. He didn't make it.
I think that Scott Ramsey has been a forerunner in this and has done some excellent research. When he started, there were a lot more skeptics than there are today. There were a lot of people who said they were crazy, that this was just a scam, there was nothing to it. And he's proved that there were radar sites, secret radar bases that were sending out microwave rays, microwave beams that could have knocked a flying saucer out of the sky and caused it to crash land north of Aztec. And he's proved that fact. So that gives it a little bit more of a validity to me, that there's some truth to these theories when you start getting the government documents in your hand.
Another intriguing fact is that the FBI file on Leo Jabauer, which has been declassified, the entire file runs for 400 pages, of which only 200 have been declassified, and many of the documents contained within the withheld material are classified for reasons affecting national security and the defence of the USA. Now, it's one thing for someone to be arrested and convicted for scams and cons and things like this, but it's a big leap for someone to be a con artist, then to find that the FBI considers them a threat to national security. And so this sort of begs the question, do the withheld documents contain far more on the Aztec case than has been published and put into the public domain by the FBI?
I think the fact that those files are still classified might be the result of two quite different things. One is that they really were involved in some stuff and had some information that for whatever reason they agreed not to talk about, but the FBI pressured them and so forth. That's certainly a possibility. Another is the general FBI attitude, the old J. Edgar Hoover attitude about keeping track of people and getting files and, having power over them. And I don't know which it was. Newton was sharp, no question about that. Whether he stumbled across some things that he shouldn't have stumbled across, I don't know.
A number of FBI documents make it very clear that the FBI and the Air Force at the time were following Newton and Jabauer very, very closely and were literally listening on their every word, were going out to conferences and lectures that both men were speaking at and wanting to know what the truth was behind the Aztec case. Was it a genuine incident, or was it simply a concoction of these two enterprising con men?
It's possible there's something in there that would bear on this and give us some answers, and maybe they would prefer, for reasons which may or may not be legitimate, to keep that quiet.
Certainly we can't say, oh, this is real because these con men told this story. But because con men told the story about Aztec doesn't mean that there wasn't an Aztec story to be told, a genuine one, a legitimate one. You have to be real careful about this guilt by association, or genuineness by association for that matter.
Con men, government cover-ups, conflicting stories. If there was a theme song for the investigation of the UFO phenomenon, it might well be the Beatles' The Long and Winding Road. The Aztec case is the perfect example of this, both figuratively and literally in the case of Heart Canyon Road, which leads to the alleged crash site.
In looking at the story, one of the things that's come under scrutiny is the fact that the skeptics on the Aztec incident claim that the Heart Canyon Road did not exist in 1948. We know it did now. That would have been the stagecoach road back in the late 1800s on the way to Durango. If you go out to the crash site today, follow Heart Canyon on the old stagecoach route, you come up to what they call the Arkansas Loop or the Arkansas Bend. And on top of that plateau is a road cut through, allegedly by the military in 1948, to get the recovery equipment, the cranes and whatnot, down in there to retrieve the craft.
So this is the Mystery Road.
This is the Mystery Road.
Tell me about the Mystery Road.
Well, this road, unless it shows up on recent maps, has never shown up anywhere.
Right.
This is the road the military, or whoever the recovery operation was, allegedly cut to get back here to retrieve the craft.
Okay. And this was in March 48.
That's right.
And this road, now most of the roads around here, you were telling me, it's oil roads and stuff like that. They're marked on the maps, the USGA maps, is it?
USGS, yeah.
Right. And this road wasn't marked on any of those maps until, if it is marked at all, until recently.
Very recently, right.
So we've got a mystery road.
Yep.
And over here, we've got a mystery cement block.
Concrete pad.
Now let's go take a look at that then.
Very good.
Tell me the story behind the mystery slab of concrete.
Well, it really makes no sense why it's even here. It's on the average 9.5 inches thick. We did a core sample.
What you are hearing is not the voice of a pilot in distress. This is something else entirely. In 1976, a young Mexican pilot named Rafael Perez was mid-flight when everything changed. His airplane was no longer under his control, and he lost consciousness. And then, he began to speak. But the words were not his own. This transmission, captured in real time, may be the only known audio of an extraterrestrial intelligence speaking through a human host. What happened in the skies over Mexico that day, and who, or what, was speaking through Rafael Perez? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Debriefed. My name is Chris Ramsey, and today we're going to be taking a pretty deep dive into a very mysterious case that was brought to light just a few days ago on social media. Now, mind you, this case has been around for a very long time, but recently on the podcast, Mr. Ballin and kind of caught fire on the internet and was spread around and sent to me.
There's this 23-year-old kid named Rafael Perez, and he's out of this airport in Chimalacán, Mexico. And I'm going to read to you the first thing that Rafael said to Carlos. The pilot is speaking, but not of his own free will. We are using him as a microphone.
I have since enlisted the help of a few researchers over at Area 52, and we have come up with a comprehensive dive into this incredible case involving a young pilot, age of 23, had barely 50 hours of flight time, and yet found himself 300 kilometers away from his destination while still maintaining an almost full tank of gas. But that's not the weird part. The weird part is that for an hour, while unconscious, he was communicating to the radio tower in multiple languages and saying that, in fact, the voice coming out of his body was not his own, but that of an extraterrestrial. Folks, this is one of the most fascinating cases I've come across, and there were actually multiple incidents involving pilots near Mexico during that time. In fact, 1 year prior, there happened to be another incident in which the pilot's aircraft was kind of commandeered by 3 flying saucers. But this obviously isn't the only case of pilots being intercepted by UFOs. And we're going to go deep into a few of these cases, including one that kind of, no pun intended, flew under the radar. During my interview with famed remote viewer Joe McMoneagle, he actually recounts a similar tale that never actually made it to the video that I did. And so this will be an exclusive snippet from my interview with Joe McMoneagle, which I didn't think was at all relevant. And I'm so glad that I did record it. Lots to cover. I got all the papers in front of me. And thank you guys for noticing my yellow cardigan. These will soon be Rafael Perez, the man in question, the man of the hour, the person that we were referencing who was channeled some type of alien being. His case happens June 21st, 1976. Well, on May 3rd, 1975, another gentleman, Carlos de los Santos, another pilot, by the age also of 23, I believe, had a really interesting encounter not only with multiple UFOs, but also subsequently twice with what are known as the Men in Black. And he describes them as identical looking, robotic in voice, and Nordic looking, very tall. This gets stranger and stranger, folks. But then we also have a case in Australia where another pilot known as Frederick Valentich, a 20-year-old Australian pilot, vanished under mysterious circumstances. And his final words were, "That strange aircraft is hovering on top of me again. It's hovering and it's not an aircraft."
It's hovering and it's not an aircraft.
So we're going to look at all these cases, but first, to set us up, suspend your disbelief, folks. Check it at the door, because we're going to get into some really wild and weird stuff. And we're going to start with my friend Joe McMoneagle. Joe McMoneagle was known as remote viewer number 001. Arguably the best remote viewer that the CIA and the Army and the government has ever produced. Joe went on to remote view Mars a million years ago for the DoD. He did so many secret projects using his psychic ability for the military that it convinced me that remote viewing is something real. So a few years ago, actually this channel is about 2 years old now, and about 2 years ago I sat down with Joe in his house in Virginia and had the pleasure of interviewing him. Throughout this 3-4 hour plus interview, Joe regaled me with so many fantastic tales of his time as a remote viewer. We then began to talk about UFOs, where he recounted a time where he was in, I think, Bermuda or the Bahamas, and he saw a craft right above his head, him and his friend. His friend was then subsequently sent to the ER with radiation burns. He was given iodine pills, and he was told kind of never to speak of this again. Right after that, Joe tells me another story, one that failed to make it on to that documentary that I put out. Well, this one rings eerily similar to what we are looking at now. Have a look.
Now, I talked to a guy. In fact, I get invited to his house down in the Florida Keys later, and my wife and I went down there. My wife at the time was my second wife. We drove down and met him, and he flew back and forth from Fort Lauderdale to Bimini once a week. He'd fly to Bimini and fly back. So he did that for years, like 2.5 years. So his plane, he knew exactly, it was a twin engine. He knew exactly the amount of fuel he needed to go from there to there. He knew exactly how much time it took to go from there to there. And this one time he was coming back from Bimini, and he said he flew into a weird cloud. And it was weird because on the tips of his wings, it was starting to encroach on the tips of his wings, and his wings were disappearing. And it made him nervous. And then suddenly, right in front of him, this bright light opened up, and this huge object started right at his plane, and he put his plane into a nosedive, and it went over him, and he cut around to the left, and all he could see was this funny cloud again. So he dropped to the ground and flew the rest of the way to Fort Lauderdale. 10 minutes later, Fort Lauderdale got him on the radio and said, identify yourself, identify yourself. And so he identified himself, and that was no surprise to him, but when he landed, he was 2 hours early. Early. And he still had a full gas load. That's what he told me. He said, I said, well, what was this? He said, I have no idea what it was. But I don't fly out of Fort Lauderdale anymore. I fly out of Miami. I'm not sure I buy UFOs from another star. Mm-hmm. I think everything's local, and they may be interdimensional.
Very interesting. Now let's put a pin in that and travel to Mexico. So we have an interview coming up with Mr. DeCrecci. Mr. DeCrecci was the gentleman that was working at Acapulco at the radio tower who communicated with Mr. Perez, who was channeling this being while he was flying over a body of water. Mr. DeCrecci sat down for a pretty lengthy interview in Spanish. My research team has since grabbed the transcript from that interview and translated it into English, and that's what we are going to be reading, which is his account. But before we do that, I want to talk to you about Carlos de los Santos, because this incident happened 1 year prior. So May 3rd, 1975 in Mexico, Carlos de los Santos, 23-year-old pilot for Mexicana Airlines, was flying a Piper PA-24 Comanche over Mexico on a clear midday route from Zihuatanejo to Mexico City. Pardon me if I'm butchering that name. Now, Carlos gives a pretty detailed and in-depth interview, which I've linked below, but around noon, Carlos was flying under 10,000 feet, all right? When all of a sudden, on the left side of his window, he sees a silver metallic craft hover right above his wingtip. This is then followed up by another one to his right. Now, when I say hover right above his wingtip, I mean this is 10 to 20 centimeters above his wingtip.
A dark gray object was flying over the left wings upper surface for about 10 or 20 centimeters.
You're talking about 20 centimeters away? That's it?
Yep.
Now, for a pilot, this must be absolutely terrifying. But it didn't stop there, because a third object approached head-on, directly toward the cockpit windshield, but at the last moment dove beneath the craft and allegedly striking the landing gear. Now, the landing gear was actually damaged, and pictures were taken and confiscated. However, as you'll see later, he tried to land and he couldn't get his landing gear to work, and that was confirmed by the radio tower. So all three objects were described as dark gray, seamless disc-shaped, with a black, glass-like dome on top. Carlos noted no visible engines, wings, or any normal means of propulsion. We're talking about 16 feet or 5 meters in diameter. All three exhibited identical characteristics. Classic disc or saucer shape with a smooth, seamless surface, no rivets, bolts, or visible joints. Dark gray, matte, or fossilized texture that lacked reflection or shine. This does remind me of the craft that Bob Lazar had worked on at S4. And each craft had a dome-like structure on top resembling a cockpit or canopy. The dome was black and glass-like, but opaque, and Carlos couldn't see inside. This reminds me of the craft at Aztec. You see in Aztec, New Mexico, when that crash happened. By the way, go check out UAP Gerb's deep dive into the Aztec crash in 1948. It's an amazing video, incredibly detail-filled, but as some of you know on the channel, I'm a big fan of Will Steinman's UFO crash at Aztec, and in here he also describes a dome on the flying saucer that is opaque and reflective, almost like plexiglass. So, immediately after the third object appeared, Carl lost all control of his aircraft. He couldn't turn left or right, and his landing gear was jammed. The plane began to climb without his input, eventually reaching 14,500 feet, which is well above the safety limits for an unpressurized cabin and without supplemental oxygen. So he radioed the Mexico City tower in a panic saying, "Mayday, I'm not flying my own craft." Here's an actual excerpt from Carlos in panic.
It's a very special experience for me.
Now, if that doesn't bring chills down your spine, I don't know what will. It seems so terrifying to me. But obviously, he goes into a great deal of detail in his 2012 interview, and he's kind of thankful for the whole ordeal, but at the time must have been really scary. So the three UFOs escorted his plane, get this, for a full 18 minutes. And not only that, radar confirmed there was an echo of 3 crafts in formation alongside his. That was confirmed. So as Carlos neared the Valley of Mexico, the discs peeled away, one ascending toward Popocatépetl volcano. Very sorry about that. Another moving off horizontally, and the third disappearing from beneath his fuselage. At that moment, full control of his craft returned to Carlos. Now, he attempted to lower the landing gear, but no lights confirmed it was down. So over the next 11 passes and 77 minutes, Carlos was forced to circle until ground crews eventually confirmed that the gear was locked, and then he eventually landed safely. Being lucid the entire time, Carlos also talks in great lengths about the maneuvers of the craft, saying the flight behavior exhibited precision control at high speed, positioning themselves a mere 20 centimeters, less than 8 inches from his wings without turbulence. And then after disengaging, all 3 discs performed a 270-degree turn with a 3-mile radius, accelerating to 400 to 450 knots, which is well above 500 miles an hour. Maneuvers that no 1975 aircraft could match. So Carlos emphasized the absence of traditional aircraft features, no wings, no engines, no control surfaces, and asked aloud during interviews, how do they fly? There are no wings, no exhaust, nothing. Some investigators, including Dr. J. Allen Hynek and Jacques Vallée, suggested that the craft created an electromagnetic field around his plane, potentially explaining his sudden loss of control and forced the altitude gain from 10,000 up to 14,500 feet. So, Carlos eventually lands the plane. He was immediately detained and given medical and psychological exams. Authorities suspected hypoxia, which is kind of this delirium that happens at high altitude, or drug use, none of which were present. He passed every test. His case made the front page news across Mexico, and 2 air traffic controllers publicly confirmed seeing the radar returns of 3 UFOs and described an impossible 270-degree turn executed within a 3-mile radius at 600 miles an hour beyond the capabilities of any known aircraft.
Cuando nos llamó más la atención y nos desconcertó fue cuando inició un viraje de 270 grados por la izquierda en un radio de 3 a 4 millas.
Carlos was later visited twice by the Men in Black. This happened twice in 1975. The first encounter was while Carlos was en route to an interview. So while driving to an interview with renowned Mexican journalist Pedro Ferriz, Carlos was intercepted. 2 identical black Grand Marquis sedans resembling diplomatic vehicles boxed in his car, one pulling alongside and the other cutting in front. The occupants? 4 men, emerging in unison and identical in appearance. They were described as followed: pale skin, blonde or light hair, Nordic, almost Scandinavian features, or as Carlos put it in his interview, they look like Vikings. Emotionless expressions, and their behavior felt robotic, stiff, and unnervingly synchronized. One man leaned into Carlos's window and said in Spanish, "If you appreciate your life, don't talk anymore." They returned to their cars and vanished without a trace, but it doesn't stop there. You see, Carlos was intercepted once again by a second encounter from the so-called Men in Black, only this time before meeting Dr. J. Allen Hynek, one of the lead investigators for Project Blue Book, renowned physicist and astronomer. So days later, just before a private breakfast with Dr. Hynek, Carlos parked outside the hotel. He ascended the steps, and he was struck in the back by a hand. Turning around, he saw one of the same 4 men from the earlier incident, identical face, same robotic demeanor. The man told him, "You are not going to see Dr. Hynek. Turn around, go." Carlos attempted to argue, but the man repeated, "Go. Get lost." And Carlos obeyed. He left without attending the meeting. Obviously, later, he would tell Hynek what happened, and UFO researchers Ray Stanford and Pedro Ferriz would help him reconstruct the events, confirming their interest in the Men in Black phenomenon and even linking it to NASA's classified research into paranormal activity. Now, we know this now to be the Men in Black. These guys show up everywhere, and the same description is given. They're almost uncanny valley-like. Like, there's something strange about their faces, the morphology of their heads, or just the way they look. And the fact that they spoke in this robotic tone just makes it so much creepier. In an interview, Carlos did emphasize the following. He said that the men were not normal humans. Their faces, height, and voices were identical. That's so scary. He said their speech was mechanical and almost computer-like, and that they bore a resemblance to Nordic beings but wore suits and traveled in diplomatic-style black vehicles. He later learned from Stanford and Hynek that other experiencers had reported similar cloned or duplicated Men in Black following major verifiable UFO events. This is so interesting that Carlos wasn't aware of the Men in Black, and he was describing exactly what other people have described. Fascinating. Now, if one of these Men in Black is out there and would like to sit down to the podcast, we'd be more than happy to accommodate your every need in order for us to have a conversation. Probably not likely going to happen, but you don't know if you don't ask. To conclude Carlos's story, he flew professionally for 32 more years, never reporting another encounter, and his voice recorded live during the event trembled as he told air traffic controllers, "I have no control. It's not me flying the aircraft." And folks, this remains one of the strongest cases on record, a broad daylight encounter with radar confirmation, physical evidence because of the collision with the landing gear on the plane, pilot testimony, and an attempted cover-up involving Nordic-looking type men in black. Just an absolutely fascinating case here of Carlos de los Santos in 1975. We're now going to go to Rafael Pacheco Perez, June 21st, 1976 in Mexico. I'm going to read to you, to start, an excerpt from UFOs and Mexican Aviation by Carlos Guzman and Alfonso Salazar. This book was printed in Spanish. I've had it translated here, this little portion, so that I can read and share it with you. The following case can be classified as the second most important to have occurred in the annals of Mexican ufology on the subject of UFOs and pilots. The first potentially being Carlos here that we just read. On the morning of June 21, 1976, Rafael Pacheco, a student at the Mexican Aviation School, was due to make a local flight to Chimalhuacan in Texcoco. I am so sorry about butchering these names, by the way. I've never gone to Mexico. I should culture myself a little bit more on how this is pronounced, but there we are. On whose ground...
I'll be right back.
runways, all students from 7 aeronautical schools that exist in our capital carry out their internships. At 8:15 a.m. that day, Rafael boarded the Cessna 150 plane with registration XBZOX, took off at 8:25 a.m. and headed east for Chimalhuacan. The weather was cloudy and foggy. So, to set this up, folks, this guy was 23 and he was a student. He was learning how to fly a plane, and this plane was made for students. This plane was made for training purposes. It didn't have a big fuel tank. It wasn't made for long distances. This begins very anomalously. Such a flight requires 60 to 90 minutes of landing and takeoff. However, 2 hours passed without news from the ZOX. That's when the school's principal, Captain Miguel Batanero, ordered several small planes to leave to locate Rafael, as it was feared he had had an accident. At around 11:15 a.m., this is 3 hours later, while in full search, Captain Batanero received a long-distance call from Captain Ortiz Lara, the school's chief pilot, who was at Acapulco Airport instructing a student who warned him that the XB-ZOX plane did not have to be there, had been reported and was about to land. This guy is now 300 kilometers away. Hypnotized by extraterrestrials, Captain Ortiz also told his superior that something was wrong with Rafael, as he had delivered a 40-minute message to humanity, and spoke of his being hypnotized by extraterrestrial beings. Very upset, Captain Batanero ordered that when he got off the plane, he had been given a medical examination in the presence of the aeronautical authorities of Acapulco. Rafael landed at 11:22 a.m. and was immediately taken to the airport command, where Dr. Ernesto Velez stated the following: "The undersigned extends to the present medical certificate Mr. Rafael Pacheco, who, after having examined, found himself clinically healthy." He had his wits about him, ladies and gentlemen. Immediately afterwards, an official information record was drawn up to attest to the event. Controller Villagran stated it was approximately 10:30 a.m. when the XB-ZOX license plate aircraft made contact with the Acapulco Tower at its own frequency of 118.5 megahertz, requesting that another frequency be designated to give a message. I told him to proceed in it, to which the ZOX insisted on the assignment of a different one, because the message was too long. He was assigned the 123.45. Subsequently, having made contact with the new frequency, the ZOX said that the pilot of the aircraft was under hypnotic effect and was being used as a means of passing the message. He said, "The person who speaks is from another planet. I come in peace. I do not want to harm the pilot or anyone else." He continued to broadcast a series of fantasies for about 45 minutes. This gets stranger and stranger, folks. But yeah, apparently he didn't want to be on, I guess, one of the frequencies that is used in short form, and he wanted to jump to a different frequency, one that I think could not be recorded, if I'm not mistaken. But let's move forward here. So here's the conversation. So the statement of Controller Kretschy, which we'll eventually get to, we have his whole interview here, which we're going to read through. Having listened to the conversation between Comrade Villagran and the famous strange beings, I agreed to take the communication with frequency 123.45, where the person continued to make a series of assertions against the human being. It made us see that we were an inferior civilization and that we were not alone in the universe, that there were many other civilizations physically similar to us, but mentally much more developed. He also said that we were close to a global catastrophe, and we are the only beings in the universe who have a self-destructive mind, and that, on the contrary, they were positive and creative. That they have the power to annihilate in an instant all our modern apparatuses and atomic weapons. He noted that they had the power to change the color of the aircraft so that it would not be seen by Earthlings, who at any given moment could be blue as the sky or white as clouds. Okay. So how come they speak Spanish? Well, this voice was asked a series of questions, such as, if they're so perfect, how come they speak Spanish? To this, the voice replied that they could understand any language in a matter of seconds. He was asked several questions in German and replied, having fully understood what I said in regular English. He explained that the message had to end so that the pilot could land without fuel problems. She was asked if we could ever see that spacecraft, replying that it would never be seen because we are so destructive and aggressive that we would surely attack it. Not wrong, but cool for asking. I would have asked the same thing. But yeah, not wrong. I would also assume that that's what we would do. And in fact, I would go so far as to say that that's what we've done. The voice was heard without any hesitation. Very easily in word, but slow. At no time did he agree to change the frequency, and a few moments later, the same voice was heard again saying, "I am 82. Who do I talk to, and where am I?" The person was asked for her identification, and I noticed that she was completely confused. Okay, when it says the person, I think it's, I think she is just he, but I think it's because of the Spanish translation. So yeah, the person said, who do I talk to? Where am I? And then the person asked for his identification and noticed that he was completely confused. Captain Batanero referred to Rafael as a model student with good grades. He's very serious, and we don't know him as a liar. I don't mean this as true or false. I'm totally skeptical. But in the case of a boy like this, and also taking into account the conversation held in German and in English, everything makes me think. Rafael Pacheco Perez is a 23-year-old boy, and until the morning of June 21st, he had 53 hours of flight. So it can be considered that he only knew the basic rules of aeronautics. He was not under the influence of alcohol or drugs that day, as was later found. He does not speak German, and as for English, he only knows the technical vocabulary related to his studies. We could see this by having him answer a questionnaire in English about his experience, of which he understood only single words. So not only did he communicate some type of message, not only did he get to a place 300 kilometers away and still have almost a full tank of fuel. By the way, had he gone from Mexico City, which would have been, a routine solo flight to Chimalhuacan airstrip, that would have been 60 to 90 minute flight. But instead, he ended up in Acapulco, a flight which should have taken 3 hours. He ended up there in 90 minutes with a full tank of gas. Even if he would have flown super, super fast and miraculously saved on gas somehow, he would have had to fly through the mountain range like a professional pilot to avoid radar detection. This makes zero sense. This is insane. This is such an insane case here. Here's Rafael's story, by the way. And we're going to get into some of the things that were said, because the voice that came through Rafael also referred to Rafael as a microphone, which is super bizarre and dark and weird. There's just so much to unpack in a story like this. This is from Rafael. At 8:35 a.m., seeing that I had deviated from the route, I tried to turn left, but the controls did not respond. They had locked themselves in the ascent position. The clocks started to swing at the same time. The compass was spinning rapidly. All the instruments had gone mad. I entered a very dense cloud and continued to ascend. I had no visibility. Similar to Joe McMonagle's report, where his friend going from Fort Lauderdale to Bimini also encountered a mist, sort of weird dark mist that he flew into. He was trying to locate the volcano. I called the Mexico Tower for 2 minutes on its 118.1 megahertz frequency, and they didn't answer me. I changed the frequency to 121.5 and even made calls from Mayday and PAN, which is like the emergency channel. But no one answered me. When I noticed the compass and instruments, I instinctively looked at the bow.
I'm gonna put this up real quick. I don't think anybody's here, but I'll be right back.